This happened when I was around 12 or 13, and it's still one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. We all refuse to talk about it, even to this day. It all started when my friend Jake invited me and a couple of other friends, Mark and Chris, over for a sleepover at his house. Jake lived in this older house on the edge of town. Nothing too weird or creepy, a nice modern home with 4 floors. Jake's mom worked nights, so it was usually just him, his little sister, and their dog Max in the house. We were wild every time we had a sleepover because there were no parents around. That meant we could mess around as much as we wanted, stay up late, raid the fridge, and play dumb games. We were in Jake's room, which wasn't huge, but had enough space for the 4 of us to lay out our sleeping bags on the floor. We'd been joking around and watching YouTube videos for a while when Mark suddenly sat up and asked where his blanket was. At first, we laughed because Mark always lost stuff, like he'd misplaced his phone while holding it, but we realized his blanket was not anywhere in the room. It wasn't under his sleeping bag, it wasn't shoved in a corner, and it wasn't even in the closet. Everywhere we checked, it was not there. He was annoyed, but grabbed another blanket from Jake's closet, and we went back to watching YouTube videos. We went into the kitchen to make some pizza rolls, and came back about 20 minutes later, and when we did, Chris's blanket was gone. We all just stared at him. No one was laughing now. Jake turned the light on, and we started looking around the room again. Once again, Chris's blanket was completely gone, just like Mark's. We all started to freak out a bit because everybody had gone upstairs to make the food, which wouldn't make any sense how the blanket was gone. We then noticed a torn corner of Mark's original blanket sticking out from under Jake's bed. So I went down to grab the blanket and I heard a loud rustling noise. "What was that?" someone had screamed. When I was leaned down to look under the bed, I realized there was something under there. We played it off thinking that it was the dog because we had not seen him all night. As we were going back upstairs, that's when we noticed the muddy footprints near the window. The window was cracked open just slightly, enough to let breeze in, but there were faint, muddy footprints on the floor, leading from the window towards Jake's bed. We all could have sworn that the window was closed earlier. We decided to get out of Jake's room and sleep in the living room instead. We brought our sleeping bags with us and made sure to lock the door behind us. Max was sprawled out on the couch, and all of a sudden randomly started barking down the hallway into the pitch black. We didn't sleep much that night. We just sat there in a huddle, holding random weapons we had found around the house. Jake's mom came home the next morning, and we told her everything. She believed everything right away, which was nice, but then she noticed the muddy footprints. When she did, she called the police. The cops couldn't find anything at first, though. They said it was probably an animal or maybe a prank, which didn't really make us feel any better. But about a week later, Jake called me and explained that they had found someone in the attic. Apparently, when the police came back for a more thorough search, they found evidence that someone had been living in Jake's house for months. The guy was hiding in the attic and sneaking down at night to steal food, clothes, and apparently blankets for over 4 months. I learned that the guy was what they call a frogger, which basically means somebody who secretly lives in other people's houses. The idea that he was under the bed while we were all sitting there is kind of insane to think about. Alright, so this happened last summer, and I still can't believe how it went down. My friends and I had been planning this sleepover for weeks. It was at Josh's house, which was pretty much the best spot for stuff like this. His house was big, his parents were chill, and there was always plenty of food and space to play physical games. Josh was one of those kids who always had crazy ideas, but we trusted him. He was funny, confident, and usually the one who came up with plans for the group. He made things fun, and we all looked up to him in some way. There were 5 of us that night. Me, Josh, Ryan, Mike, and Ethan. We showed up at around 6 p.m. and just chilled. We did what most teens do, which was order a pizza, play video games, and watch horror movies until things got late. Around 10, Josh's cousin Alex showed up. I didn't think much of it because Alex would always swing by sometimes. He was a few years older, kind of sketchy, but Josh always said he was a good person. Alex hung out for maybe an hour, ate all of our food, and then just left. It was kind of annoying. Josh said something about how Alex was crashing at his place while his parents were out of town, but he wasn't staying the night with us. This made sense, so I didn't care to ask more questions. The rest of the night was pretty boring. We played some card games and eventually decided to sleep in the living room. Josh said his room upstairs was too small for all of us, plus the couch and floor space downstairs were more comfortable. We all set up our sleeping bags, left a few lights on, and fell asleep around midnight. I don't think any of us were completely knocked out though. We were all joking and half awake for a while, shouting explicit things and dirty jokes to make someone across the room laugh. At some point, I woke up to the sound of the sliding glass door in the kitchen opening. It wasn't loud, but it was just enough to snap me out of my half-sleep. I figured maybe Josh had gone to get a snack or something, but then I heard muffled voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, so I looked over at Josh, and he was still sleeping in his sleeping bag. Before I could say anything, the living room lights flipped on. Standing there was someone wearing a ski mask and holding a gun. My fight and flight was triggered, and I froze. Behind him was another guy, also masked and carrying a duffel bag. They started shouting, telling us to sit up and stay quiet. We were told to empty our pockets, grab our wallets, and toss everything into the middle of the room. I've never been held at gunpoint, so I felt really nervous, scrambling to do what he said. I couldn't stop staring at the gun in his hand. It wasn't some fake toy, it was real, and he was pointing it right at us. I couldn't understand that it was happening. Josh was trying to act just as scared as the rest of us, but something about the way he kept glancing at the armed robber felt off for some reason. It was like they were making eye contact, almost like they were communicating without saying anything. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the more I watched, the more obvious it became. The robber kept screaming orders, telling us to grab our phones, watches, and anything valuable. He even made Mike dump out his backpack because he said it looked too full. The other guy with the robber started going through the kitchen drawers, grabbing random stuff like Josh's mom's jewelry box. It was chaos. He even started drinking the milk straight out of the carton. This made me panic more because I wanted to laugh, which is messed up. And then he fired the gun. It wasn't at any of us, thank God, but he shot it into the ceiling. The sound was deafening. Ryan started crying, and Ethan couldn't stop shaking. The robber told us to shut up or the next shot wouldn't miss. I couldn't even think straight. The only thing I could do was hope that it would be over soon. After they grabbed everything, the robber and the other guy ran out the door, leaving us sitting there in shock. No one said anything for a while. Josh was the first one to speak, saying something like, "What just happened?" But the way he said it felt so fake, like he was trying too hard to act surprised. That's when Ethan noticed something. Josh's stuff wasn't touched. His phone was still sitting on the coffee table, his wallet was still in his bag, and even his expensive sneakers by the door were still there. It didn't make any sense at the time. Ethan started putting it together out loud, saying how weird it was that Alex the cousin had shown up earlier that night and someone had come back to rob us. He kept saying that it didn't feel random. We all started to connect the dots, and an argument broke out. So we wanted to go find his cousin, but then we were confronted by Josh. He flipped out and started yelling that we were crazy and that it wasn't Alex. None of us were buying it though. Josh was sweating like crazy. He kept saying we needed to call the cops, but Ethan pointed out that Josh didn't even try to stop the robbers, even though he supposedly knew him. It was obvious that Josh had set us up. We ended up calling our parents instead of the cops. None of us trusted Josh to be honest if we involved the police. When our parents got there, Josh was still trying to play the victim, saying we were being paranoid. None of us believed him anymore. Later, we found out that Alex did have a record for stuff like petty theft and breaking into lockers. It wasn't a surprise. Josh had sold us out, and for what? A few $100 worth of phones and wallets? I haven't talked to Josh since that night. None of us have. This happened when I was a kid, about 30 years ago, and I still think about it sometimes. I was around 12 or 13, and my friend Megan invited a few of us over for a sleepover. There were 4 of us. Megan's house wasn't anything special, just a normal suburban place, but it had this attic that we all thought was super cool. That's where we usually hung out when we were at her place. Usually at our sleepovers, we would just talk and hang out. It was nice, and sometimes we would smoke up there because we were kids just trying to be kids. One time, Megan said she found her dad's digital camera in the attic earlier that day. It was one of those chunky cameras with a tiny screen on the back. We thought it was funny how it looked, and Megan said we should mess around with it and take some pictures. We started taking stupid pictures of each other, pretending to pose like models or acting like we were in a scary movie. The flash on the camera was so bright, so everything looked washed out, which made it funnier. We even went down to the basement for a few pictures because we thought it would look creepy. And the basement was dusty and looked kind of gross, so we didn't stay there for long. After a while, we went back into the living room to chill. Megan started scrolling through the pictures on the screen, and at first we were just laughing at how ridiculous we all looked. Then Megan suddenly stopped scrolling and stared at the camera. She shouted to us and said something like, "Who's that?" In one of the pictures, there was a man in the background. He was just standing there near the living room doorway, looking straight at the camera. None of us remembered seeing anyone when we took that picture. Megan wasn't good with stuff like this, so she kept lying to herself and tried to say it was probably a shadow or something. But it didn't look like a shadow. It looked like a man. He was tall, wearing dark clothes, and his face was pale. His expression wasn't angry or anything. It was blank, like he was just watching us. We started freaking out. Megan kept scrolling through the pictures, and it got worse. In the next photo, he was closer. He was in the kitchen doorway, just barely visible. The one after that was worse. He was in the middle of the room, a few feet behind us. None of us had seen him while we were taking the pictures, and the idea that he was just there the whole time made me think of all the possibilities that could have happened. The last picture was the one that made me start crying. It was a picture of me and Emily messing around on the floor, pretending to fight or something. The man was right behind me. His hand was almost on my shoulder. I couldn't stop staring at it. It wasn't blurry or distorted or anything you could explain away. It was clear. His face, his clothes, everything. We all saw it. Megan grabbed a broom and demanded we check the house. Emily wanted to wake up Megan's parents, but Megan said they'd think we were being dumb. We turned on every light and went through the house together, checking every room, closet, and even under the beds. Everything was locked and nothing looked out of place, but none of that made me feel better. Eventually, we woke up Megan's parents. Megan's mom looked freaked out when we told her, but her dad tried to stay calm. He said it was probably just a reflection or something on the camera lens. Megan's dad checked the house and even went out into the backyard with a flashlight, but he didn't find anything. While this was happening, I remember the rest of us sat in the living room, too scared to say much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's face, the same face in the photos. The next morning, Megan's parents said they were going to call the police. They told us to stay put while they explained everything. But when Megan grabbed the camera to show the pictures to her parents again, they were gone. Every single one of them. The random pictures that were taken before that night were still on the camera, but all the ones we'd taken during the sleepover had disappeared. Everyone and their mom said it was just a glitch on the camera, as the tech back then wasn't that good, but I don't think he believed it. Megan's mom didn't say much after that, but she looked worried. None of us knew what to do. The man in those pictures was real. I know what I saw, and so did the others. After that night, none of us ever went back to Megan's house. We didn't really talk much about it either. I think we were all just trying to forget it ever happened. Megan acted like it didn't bother her, but I could tell it did. We all drifted apart after that, and I haven't spoken to her in years. Everyone didn't want to believe it happened, even the parents. But still to this day, I remember there was that man in those photos, and it was not a dream. Ben invited us over to his house one night. Ben wasn't really my friend. He was one of those kids who was always around, but never really part of the group. There were 6 of us that slept at his house that night. Why we all collectively chose to go to Ben's house is still beyond me to this day. He invited us over for a sleepover and said we'd watch horror movies all night. It sounded fun, so we all agreed to go. Ben's house was normal enough, kind of old but not creepy or anything. His parents were out of town for the entire weekend, and I still think it was a bit irresponsible to leave a bunch of kids in a house for an entire weekend, but they were kind of rich. They left us tons of snacks and said they'd be back on Monday. That was the first red flag. Honestly, like I said, who leaves a bunch of 13-year-olds alone all night? Ben had set up everything in the living room. He had a big couch, tons of blankets, and a stack of old horror DVDs. We watched some cheesy old slasher movie, throwing popcorn at the screen and making fun of the bad acting, and Ben started off not saying much at the start of the night. After the first movie, Ben started talking about how real horror wasn't what you saw in movies. He said that it was about the things people don't see and the stuff that happens when no one's paying attention. I looked at one of our other friends and he mouthed the words WTF, and no one said a word. And then Jake told him to shut up and put on another movie, and we all laughed it off. The second movie was darker, slower, and honestly kind of boring. Tyler and Sarah started whispering to each other, talking about school drama, while Emma scrolled on her phone. I noticed Ben wasn't watching the movie anymore. He was staring at all of us, one by one, like he was angry. I asked him what he was looking at, and he just smiled and said, "You'll see." By the time we got to the third movie, the vibe had completely shifted. This movie was about this creepy old house, and Ben kept making comments about how it reminded him of his own. He said weird stuff like how houses could keep secrets and you should never go around looking for things you aren't ready to find. None of us really knew what to say, so we just continued to ignore him. Then, during one of the quieter parts of the movie, Ben stood up and said that he had something perfect to show us. He told us to pause the movie and follow him upstairs. I didn't want to go, but Jake and Tyler were already getting up, so I went along. Emma and Sarah looked nervous. Ben's room was so strange. The walls were covered in posters for old horror movies, but what really stood out were the shelves. They were full of these weird trinket type of glass jars and old books, and these creepy dolls that looked way too realistic. The dolls were not store-bought, he had told us. They were homemade, stitched together from scraps of fabric with mismatched buttons for eyes. Some of them were missing arms or legs as if they were torn off, and one had a weird red stain across its face. Sarah pulled me aside while Ben was showing everyone the dolls and asked if I also thought Ben and everyone in his bloodline was just weird. I started laughing because Sarah was always good at lightening the mood, but as we looked over, Ben seemed proud of it. He picked up one of the dolls and started explaining how he made them, saying how each one had a soul and they were all his friends. We all kind of laughed nervously, but I think we all started to feel the same thing, and that was that we didn't want to be there anymore. Then Ben said he had something really special to show us, and I thought to myself, oh, it gets worse? We walked over to his closet and he opened the door. Inside was a life-size doll sitting in a wooden chair. It had button eyes similar to the smaller ones, but its hair wasn't fabric, it was real. Long, dark human hair sewn onto its head. The strangest part was that no one in Ben's family had that color hair. Its hands weren't fabric either. They were rubber gloves, stuffed with something heavy that made them look eerily lifelike. Tyler and Jake started backing up to the door to try to sneak off, and Emma and Sarah both whispered that we should leave. But Ben just stood there, smiling. He said the doll was different, and that it was alive in a way the others aren't. He then added almost casually that it doesn't like strangers. That was it for me. I turned and walked out, and the others followed. Ben didn't try to stop us, but as we all headed downstairs, he said something like, "You shouldn't leave too soon. It gets mad when people leave." We all kind of walked out of Ben's room awkwardly, trying not to look. He was still standing by the closet where the creepy life-size doll had been sitting. I couldn't tell if he was watching us or not. No one said a word as we walked downstairs. It was late, past midnight, and the only light came from the TV in the living room. Nobody said much as we settled back onto the couch and floor. It was so awkward. Jake was the first to finally say something. He said something about how weird Ben was being. Emma and Sarah nodded, both agreeing that the whole night had been uncomfortable. Nobody really laughed or made jokes like we usually would. It wasn't funny. We set up sleeping bags and blankets in the living room. The TV stayed on for some light, and one by one, everyone started drifting off. I couldn't fall asleep right away though. My mind kept going back to the doll, the way it looked so lifelike with its button eyes and that real hair. Everything I've known about Ben was wrong. An hour must have passed before I started to feel myself almost falling asleep. Ben still hadn't come downstairs. I figured he must have stayed in his room, which was fine by me. The less I saw of him tonight, the better. I don't know how long I was asleep before I wake up, but it couldn't have been too long. The TV was still on. At first, I didn't know what woke me up, but I just did for some reason. I sat up and glanced around the room. Everyone else was asleep. Then I saw it. Something in the corner of the room. It looked like a shadow at first, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it wasn't just a shadow. It was Ben. He was standing there, perfectly still, wearing the doll suit. The rubber hands filled with tan liquid hung limp at his sides, passing his knees. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, staring straight at me. I didn't know what to do. My glasses were sitting on the floor next to me, so I reached for them slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. It was Ben standing in that suit, staring at me like he was waiting for me to wake up. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't. I couldn't even breathe right. I just sat there, gripping my blanket, trying to convince myself that I was still dreaming. But I wasn't. The way the suit sagged around him was disgusting. He didn't move. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring for minutes. My mind was trying to understand how he even got into the suit. It had been so big and heavy when it was sitting in his closet. I didn't think it was possible for him to wear it, but somehow, here he was. I don't know how long I sat there staring back at him. Then, without a sound, he took one step forward. That's when I lost it. I scrambled to my feet, tripping over my sleeping bag, and practically fell onto Jake. He woke up, asking what was wrong, but by the time I turned back to the corner, Ben was gone. The suit was gone. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but Jake just shook his head and said I was seeing stuff. Tyler and Emma woke up too, asking what was going on. but I couldn't get the words out. I felt terrible. When morning finally came, Ben was acting like nothing had happened. He came downstairs in his regular clothes, eating cereal like it was just another day. I didn't say anything to him. None of us did. We all just packed up our stuff and left as soon as we could. On my way out, I glanced at Ben, and he looked at me and winked. Back when I was 11, I had a sleepover at my best friend Alyssa's house. She lived just down the street from me, and we went to school together and hung out all the time. So on this night in particular, I walked over to her house sometime in the afternoon like usual. The first part of the sleepover went normally. I don't recall if it was a weekend or just a summer night, but I know that we stayed up pretty late. Alyssa's bedroom was upstairs at the front part of the house. At probably like midnight, we were in Alyssa's room and we noticed something out the window. We could see the street in front of her house and had a pretty good view of it. There was this guy walking down the street, but then he turned around and walked back. He seemed to be almost pacing back and forth between the house past Alyssa's to the right and the one next door to the left. We watched him walking and were wondering what he was doing. None of us knew who he was or recognized him as a neighbor. This was something that was unusual for the street as well. Typically, there were not people walking down the street really late at night. After watching him pacing in the street for several minutes, I remember that he stopped and was kind of looking around. Then he looked up and we were sure that he saw us. He seemed to almost make eye contact with us for a second, and Alyssa and I quickly ducked down. Obviously, we didn't want him to see us, whoever he was. We decided not to look out the window anymore after that. However, probably 2 or 3 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door of the house. We both feared that it was the man right away. Alyssa's parents had gone to bed already, so we were the only ones awake in the house. We ignored the first knock, but there was soon another one. You could not see who was at the front door from Alyssa's window because the front step had a small roof over it. So we decided to go downstairs and see who was there. After making it downstairs, it was very dark in the house, but we didn't turn on any lights. Soon we made it to the front area of the house and to a window. We both looked out and saw the same man from the street standing there. He looked very suspicious because he had a hood covering most of his head and I could barely see his face. And the weather was not bad or anything that would make that seem normal. As we were both looking at him, he suddenly started looking around and then locked eyes with us. It was just like before when he had somehow seen us. We both ducked away from the window at that moment. However, the man then charged for the window that we were at. He reached it and started pounding on the glass. Alyssa and I both ran upstairs and woke up her parents. By the time they got downstairs though, the man was gone. The police were called and they arrived a while later with the man still nowhere in sight. We were afraid that he would return, but he didn't. After that night, we thankfully never saw that man again. We talk about that night all the time still, wondering who he was and what he was doing. This happened back when I was 8 years old. Back then, I had a friend named Max. Max and I were friends from school and would hang out at each other's houses. I remember that one Friday night, I got invited to sleep over at his house. For the most part, Max's family had a pretty average house in a common neighborhood. The living room of the house was at the front end, and the kitchen was towards the back. The bedrooms were located upstairs. So I went to his house after school with my sleeping bag, toothbrush, and some other stuff. My mom was going to pick me up from his house the next morning. When I got there, I remember I had pizza with Max and his family and we hung out. Later on in the night, I don't remember exactly why, but for some reason we were going to sleep in the living room. Maybe it was because that's where the TV was, or maybe it was just because there was more space there. But both Max and I put our sleeping bags on the floor down in the living room. When it got late, Max's parents and sister went up to bed, and the two of us hung out in the living room. We didn't stay up that much longer though, because Max got tired pretty quickly. I remember that he got into his sleeping bag and was soon out. I, on the other hand, was not that tired. I remember laying down, getting under my covers, and closing my eyes, but for some reason, I just couldn't sleep. I really didn't feel tired at all. I didn't have a cell phone or anything way back then, so I was pretty bored. I was just laying there in the dark, looking around the living room, or trying to sleep. This went on for what felt like a really long time. I would say that it was at least 30 minutes to an hour. The house was very dark and also completely silent. Then, suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of the garage door open. It was the door that led from the garage to the pantry, which was next to the dining room. When I heard it, I was really surprised. I had no idea who that would be. For a moment, I thought maybe it was Max's father, but I had literally seen everybody in his family go up to bed in the other direction. I also could not see the garage door from where I was. You see, the living room was completely closed off from that part of the house. You had to go around a corner and enter the kitchen. Then you would have a view of the dining room and pantry area. I could only see a small part of the kitchen from where I was, and it was the opposite direction. After I heard the door open, I briefly heard footsteps, which were really quiet, but then things were pretty much silent again. I quickly became really nervous, fearing that it might be an intruder. I was expecting whoever it was to probably walk through the kitchen and either go into the living room or go upstairs. Either way, that would be walking by me if they did. I laid in my sleeping bag and did not make a sound at all, but I did look over to the corner. I didn't see anything, but I was half expecting to see somebody walk around the corner at any moment. But as I continued to watch, I didn't see anyone. I did not hear anything more either. I definitely was not tired now. I just kept laying there, not knowing what to do or what was going on for the longest time. Maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, I still hadn't heard or seen anything, and I decided to wake Max up. I went over to him and tapped his shoulder. After a few tries, he awoke, and he asked me what was going on. I told him that I heard the garage door to the house open, and I thought that somebody had entered. He asked me if I was joking, and when I said no, he seemed to wake up. After whispering to each other and discussing it for a few moments, we decided to go and look. I was pretty nervous, but Max and I got up and walked over to the corner to go and see. We walked over, and right before we reached the wall and entrance of the kitchen, we heard the sound of the door opening again. Then, as we looked around the corner, we were just in time to see the garage door closing and somebody walking out of it. We did not get a good look at all of who the person was, but we could tell that somebody had been there. After the door to the garage shut, Max and I were both completely shocked. Max then ran over to the garage door and locked it. After that, he sprinted back over to the living room and said he was going to wake up his parents. I waited in the living room as Max went upstairs and returned about a minute later with his parents. They came down, and Max's father walked into the garage. We discussed what happened with his mother, and a few minutes later, his father returned inside. He said that whoever was there had left. Max's father even looked around the backyard a little bit and was confident that he didn't see anyone. At that point, everybody pretty much went back to bed. Max's parents went back upstairs, and Max and I got back into our sleeping bags. Now, Max once again fell asleep relatively fast, and I once more could not. I laid there awake for at least another 30 minutes. Things were completely silent. However, I finally started to feel relaxed and even a little bit sleepy. But just then, those feelings were interrupted when I heard the garage doorknob turn. With it being locked though, the door did not open. I figured that the person was back. Luckily, they were not able to get inside. I just heard them try the door that one time. I kept laying there and listening. There were no more noises. Eventually, I was able to fall asleep. The next morning, I told Max about hearing the doorknob turn again the previous night. We told his parents as well, and his dad searched the entire property. However, whoever had been there must have actually been gone then, because he didn't find anything. My mom soon came and picked me up after that. I didn't really hear anything more of it from Max. I stayed over at his house a few more times, and nothing like that ever happened again. Years ago, when I was 14, I had a really crazy experience when my friend came to sleep over. My best friend Ryan was coming over to hang out and spend the night. On this night in particular, it was a weekend, and my sister was staying over at her friend's house. Meanwhile, my parents were there, but they went out for the night, and Ryan and I stayed at the house. We were just playing video games in my room, which was what we typically do when hanging out. After a while of this, I remember that there was a knock at the front door to the house. We paused the game and went down the hallway and over to the front door. I looked out of the window first, and I saw a woman standing there on the front step. She appeared to be sort of young and had shorter dark hair. I had never seen her before though. I ended up answering the door, and the woman told us that her car broke down and she needed some help. When I asked her what she needed help with, she asked if we could come over and look at her car. Neither of us really knew anything about cars though. I told the woman that I wouldn't be much help and told her that she should call a mechanic or something. The woman still asked us to come over to her car. I did not see her car, but I assumed that it was down the street. As a kid who didn't even have my license, I knew that I wouldn't be any help. I asked the woman what happened to her car though. If it was a flat tire or something like that, maybe we would be able to assist her. She said that she didn't know, but the engine wouldn't start. I knew that was outside of our ability to help, and I told her that we couldn't, but maybe somebody else could. I also had a sort of bad feeling about it as well. So finally, the woman said okay, and she started walking off. I went back inside, and Ryan and I then went back to my room. We continued playing video games for a while. I remember though, at one point, I left the room. As I was passing by the front window, I saw the same woman was back and she was walking through the front yard. I stopped and watched to see where she would go. The woman ended up leaving the yard and going back out into the street. She didn't seem to notice me watching her, but my bad feeling about the woman stayed the same, and I wondered what she was up to. It had been a little while since she had been at my house. I would have guessed that she would have kept going to the neighbors until somebody would help her or something. But after she left the property, I just continued on. Ryan and I kept playing video games together until at least another hour after that. As we were both sitting in my bedroom, we had a view of my window into the backyard a little. Both at once, we noticed movement in the backyard. After a closer look, we noticed that the woman was now walking in the backyard. I really couldn't believe that she was back yet again. We stopped our game and both walked over to the window. The woman walked through the yard and towards the back side of the house. She was not heading directly towards us, but possibly towards the back door, which was down a ways. I opened my window just a crack and yelled to the woman, asking her what she was doing. The woman instantly stopped and then looked over at us. She said once again that her car broke down. Then she started walking over to us at the window, and I could hear her asking if we could come help with her car. I couldn't believe that she was asking us again, and I wondered if the woman was either on drugs or if something was wrong with her. I told her that she had already asked us that. The woman walked all the way until she was right on the other side of the window though, and then she continued. She asked us if we could come out and go over to her car and help her with it. I told her no again and asked her to leave our yard. When the woman stayed there, I told her that I was going to call the police and they could help her with her car situation. After hearing that, it seemed to anger the woman. She said no very loudly. When I asked why not, the woman then made a fist and punched the window extremely hard. Ryan and I both jumped back. Then the woman took off running, seeming to sprint as fast as she could out of the yard. We went around to the front of the house and watched her make her way into the street and then go out of sight. Ryan and I did call the police then, and we told them of the whole situation. The woman was acting very suspicious, if nothing else. They came out and we talked to them briefly, and they said they would go look for the woman. I didn't hear anything more about it though. Soon after, my parents returned home. Ryan stayed the night, and we had no more interactions with the woman. Sometimes I wonder if she even had a car, or if she was just trying to get us out of the house for some reason. I really don't know where she came from or where she went either. It was really weird. I remember one time I went to this sleepover with some friends when I was really young. I'm pretty sure it was one of the kids' birthdays. I don't even remember who all was there though. I knew maybe 3 of the kids out of the probably 7 or 8 that were at the sleepover. What I really remember though was that we all went to sleep in the kids' bedroom. It must have been pretty large to fit us all, and we all had sleeping bags and were on the floor. I fell asleep that night around the time everybody else did, but I remember that I randomly woke up in the night. After being really confused and groggy for a few seconds because I was not waking up at my house, I remembered things. I was at the sleepover still, and it was still the middle of the night. I just looked around the mostly dark room. The only real light came in from the window, which did not have any blinds on it or anything, and that's when I noticed that another kid was up. I can't remember his name. I hadn't really known him that well, but he was standing at the window, and I realized that a person was outside on the other side of the window. This was really strange. The person appeared to be a man, but I couldn't really see. I just laid there and watched, and I noticed that this kid appeared to be talking with the man at the window. I had so many questions, starting with, who was this man? Why was he at the window? And why was this kid talking with him? The obvious guess was that he was possibly going to try to kidnap the kid or something. I remember that at that point, I sat up. This was maybe 10 seconds after first seeing what was going on. At that point, I saw the kid turn around and look at me. Then the man at the window quickly disappeared and ran away. I didn't say anything. I'm not really sure why. Maybe I was just so confused, or maybe I was just truly speechless. Anyways, the kid then walked over, got inside of his sleeping bag, and seemed to go back to sleep. I just turned over and I tried to go back to sleep myself. And eventually I did, and I didn't hear or see anything else strange. I also was not woken up for the rest of the night. When everybody got up the next morning, we all went to the living room and kitchen for breakfast. I remember that it was then that I saw the kid, and I asked him who was at the window. Surprisingly, the kid completely denied it. He said that he didn't remember going to the window or anything. I told him what happened, and he claimed that I must have been dreaming it. I was so confused. I knew that I wasn't dreaming it, but I didn't say anything else about it for the rest of the time. Well, I ended up seeing the same kid again probably a few months later. It was at another kid's birthday party who we both happened to know. There, I brought it up again. This time, he did not deny it. He told me that he randomly woke up in the night and saw this guy at the window. The guy then waved him over, and he went, thinking that the guy must have been a family member of one of the kids or something. He opened the window, and the guy was telling him to go around and unlock the front door. That's when he saw me, and the guy ran away. He said that he just went to bed after that. He told me that he denied it because he thought he would get in trouble or something. I'm not really sure why, but I'm really glad that the kid didn't listen to the man and unlock the door. And I'm really glad that I woke up when I did. This happened back when I was 12 years old. I was going to a sleepover at my best friend Julia's house. I remember that I went over to her house in the afternoon, and in the early evening we went to this park. There was a park within walking distance of her house, and it was just a few blocks away. It would take less than 10 minutes to get there along the sidewalks. Julia and I both played softball together, so we went to the park to practice. The two of us walked there, and when we got to the park, we were the only ones there. It had one softball field, a few benches, a large open area of grass, and some trees scattered around. The park was surrounded by the residential neighborhood. So we started playing catch and did some fielding practice as well. Probably like 45 minutes into being there, only a few people had passed by. Occasionally somebody would walk their dog through the park or something like that. But then there was this man who we noticed. He walked to the park and was wearing sunglasses. The guy then went and sat down at this bench not far from the field. He sat down and just started watching us. We continued, not thinking too much of it. I didn't look at the guy for a long time. Probably 30 to 45 minutes after that, though, he was still there, and that's when we were about done. We then got our stuff and started walking back to Julia's house. Now we had to walk past the man because the bench that he was on was right next to the walking path. We did, and not long after, he got up and seemed to start following us. Because as we walked on the sidewalk and left the park, we could hear the guy about 30 or 40 feet back. Neither of us said anything, but when we turned and went up a block and the guy was still there, I think we were both thinking the same thing. I remember that Julia suggested we not go straight home and we take a different way. She didn't say why, but I knew it would be to try to lose the guy following us. At the end of that street, we went right instead of going straight. Then we went right again at the next block. I stopped hearing the guy, and after looking back, we didn't notice him following anymore. We then went and turned around, and then went around the block before going back to Julia Street. Once we got there, we did not see the man, and we went inside of her house. Julia and I hung out inside, and I had my sleeping bag and stuff to stay the night. So we were both in Julia's room just hanging out and talking hours later, and we both stayed up pretty late. We were the only ones still up by probably midnight. Julia's bedroom was at the front side of the house. I remember that her blinds were closed, but at one point she got up and looked out of the window. She then told me that she could see that creepy guy that was following us. I thought that she was joking at first, but as she kept looking outside, I got up to see for myself. When I got to the window, sure enough, he was there. The guy was standing on the sidewalk right in front of Julia's yard. He was still wearing sunglasses and kind of looking around. We were wondering what he was doing. Then he appeared to look over at us and notice us. We both ducked down immediately as fast as we could. After a few moments, Julia carefully looked up and slightly opened the blinds again. When she did, she said that he was coming into the yard. We both ran out of the room and into the hallway. Julia then went and woke up her parents. Meanwhile, I did not hear any kind of a knock at the door or anything. I wasn't sure where the man was. A few minutes later, Julia's dad went outside to look for the guy, but he was gone by then. We thought about calling the police, but did not. For the rest of the time, the guy did not return. Neither of us saw him again, but it still creeps me out to think back to it. One time when I was younger, I had a sleepover with 4 of my friends. We had a bit of a friend group and would hang out all the time. We were at Riley's house, which was pretty big and also pretty nice. What I really remember about the night started pretty late though. We were all hanging out and talking, and it was past midnight. All Riley's family, including his parents, had gone to bed upstairs. Meanwhile, we were down in the living room, which is where we would all be sleeping. So, at some point, the front doorbell rang. It obviously caught all of our attention. The conversation that we were having and the jokes that we were making instantly stopped. There was then dead silence for a few seconds. Then we all started talking again, wondering who it could be. Riley then stood up and started walking to the other side of the house where the front door was. All the rest of us naturally got up and followed. When we got to the front of the house, Riley said that nobody was there. We all went to the front door, and I remember that when I looked, sure enough, whoever rang the bell was gone. This was pretty strange. In fact, Riley took a few steps outside to look around. Nothing seemed unusual. We then all decided to go back to what we were doing. When we got back to the living room, the discussion became talking about who it could be. Some of us thought that it was maybe another friend pranking us. After talking for probably another 10 to 20 minutes, the doorbell suddenly rang again. This time, we all got up at once and headed again to the front of the house. When we got there, once more, nobody was seen outside. Riley opened up the door again. This time though, all 5 of us went outside and looked around. We looked around the front yard and into the street a little bit, and even went around to the backyard. After a thorough inspection though, we did not come up with anything. We all then went back inside and back to the living room again. It seemed as though whoever was doing this had gotten away with it. Probably another 10 or 20 minutes went by. Then, all of a sudden, we heard another noise. It was not a doorbell though. It was the sound of the front door opening. We could not believe it. But then, we realized that when we all went back inside, whoever came in last had forgot to lock the door. We realized that whoever had been doing this to us was now inside of the house. We couldn't see from where we were, and we were not close to the stairs to go up, but we were near the stairs to go down to the basement. So all at once, we ran for it and went downstairs. Once in the basement, we basically all hid. It didn't seem like a possible prank anymore. I mean, it was really late at night, and somebody had actually entered the house. For a while, as we all hid downstairs, things were completely silent. After probably 10 minutes of this, we started to whisper to each other. Then, after a while of this, we started to talk. Then finally, we decided to go upstairs and check. We hadn't heard any noises like somebody walking around or anything, so we carefully went back up. Once we did, we didn't see or hear anything. We checked the house and went upstairs. Nobody was there. We realized that whoever had entered must have left as well. We locked all the doors and then went back into the living room. There was no more ringing of the doorbell or anything. We eventually fell asleep, and the next morning talked about it again. We even searched the house again, but nobody was there. We're all still friends to this day and still bring it up from time to time. I have no idea who it was that did that to us. When I was a kid, my best friend's name was Sam. We lived only a few miles away from each other and would hang out all the time. I remember that many times I would go sleep over at his house, and he would also stay over at mine sometimes. Both of our houses were pretty average for the most part, although Sam's was a little bit nicer in my opinion, and it was also a little larger. This event I'm going to talk about took place when we were both 10 years old. Sam and I went to the same school, and one day, late in the school year, I went over to his house after classes. The plan was to sleep over, and I was excited about it. I brought my sleeping bag with, and would sleep on the floor of his bedroom. So after school, I went over to Sam's house, and we hung out for the rest of the day. I don't remember much, but I'm pretty sure we just played video games and stuff. We had to go to bed at probably like 10 or 11 p.m. So I set up my sleeping bag, and then Sam turned out all the lights and got into his bed. At his house, every single light was off, and I didn't really like that. In my bedroom at home, I always kept a small lamp on in the corner that gave a little bit of light, and before that, I would have a night light in the corner of my bedroom. I just didn't like things to be completely pitch black. I really could barely see anything, but I remember that Sam's bedroom door was open and there was a small light from something. I think it was maybe the thermostat. Anyways, I remember trying to fall asleep. Sam seemed to fall asleep pretty quick, but I didn't. I really wasn't that tired for some reason. I was lying there awake and eventually tried falling asleep, but after a while, I just couldn't. Sam's bedroom was towards the end of the hallway where the other bedrooms were. Everybody else in his family had long gone to sleep, and the house was completely silent. But then, I thought that I heard the sound of somebody walking. I thought maybe it was Sam's parents or something. It was very quiet, because basically the entire house was carpet. So it wasn't easy to hear the footsteps, but you still could, especially when it was this quiet. I looked over and then thought that I saw somebody coming into view. I could only see a small part of the hallway through the open bedroom door. But then, it seemed like somebody walked towards the doorway. It was so dark that I couldn't see very well, but I kept watching. Then I saw much more clear, a man walking into the doorway of Sam's room. When I saw this, I realized that even though it was really dark, I could tell that it wasn't Sam's dad. I had no idea as to who it would be. I closed my eyes and didn't move a muscle. I was pretending to be asleep even though I wasn't. The man kept standing there for a little while. After probably like 30 seconds, I opened my eyes again and he was still there. He was just standing in the doorway and facing us. I couldn't completely tell if he was looking at me. I didn't move my head at all and just opened my eyes very carefully. I closed my eyes again and pretended to be asleep. I just hoped that the man wouldn't enter Sam's room. Then I heard the guy sort of walking away down the hallway. I really didn't know who this guy was or why he was here. I also didn't know if he was going to come back or not. As I laid there, I just kept closing my eyes and didn't move. During this time, I didn't really hear any more noises. I was really too scared to get up and wake Sam up or do anything else. Eventually, after I'm not even sure how long, I fell asleep. The next thing I knew, I was waking up and it was still dark out. Sam was tapping me on the shoulder telling me to wake up. After sitting up in my sleeping bag, I noticed that Sam's bedroom door was now closed. He then told me that there was a man in the house and the police were on the way. We were supposed to stay in his bedroom and not leave. Then we waited inside of Sam's bedroom and didn't really hear much. But after a while later, the police arrived, and we continued to stay in the bedroom. After a long time, Sam's parents finally came and told us what happened. We found out that a man was located hiding in the basement. I guess he tried opening Sam's parents' bedroom, and it woke both of them up. The man fled, and Sam's parents called the cops. Then they knew that the man was at the other end of the house, and Sam woke up from the noise. He then left the bedroom to see what was going on, and when he returned, he woke me up. I guess it was the same man that I had seen. I'm really glad that the man didn't cause any harm. I never found out why he had entered, or how he had entered the house. I slept over at Sam's house multiple times after that. Luckily, nothing like that ever happened again. One bizarre thing that happened when I was a kid was a sleepover experience that I had. It was back when I was probably about 8 or 9 years old. I just know that I lived with my parents and older brother in the suburbs. A new family moved into the house across the street and one house to the right. They had a kid who was my age, and I remember meeting him when they first arrived. His name was Jake. There were a few kids in the neighborhood that I would hang out with here and there. Over the first week or two that Jake lived there, I sort of hung out with him like twice. My impression of him was that he was pretty weird. He was kind of rude and didn't seem to like the same things that the other neighborhood kids and I did. There were a few games that we would always play, and I remember that when we invited him, he said that they were dumb. I don't really remember much else, but I just know that I didn't have the best impression of him. Then, one day, my mom told me that Jake was going to have a sleepover with me. I remember thinking, when did I agree to this? I told my mom that I thought he was kind of weird, but she said that he probably was just shy and insecure about moving to a new town. Apparently, Jake's mom asked my mom if he could stay over because she wanted him to make new friends. I'm not sure if he had a hard time making friends or anything, but I reluctantly agreed. So Jake walked over with his mom, and our moms talked for a little while. Jake's mom seemed pretty nice, but Jake really didn't. We went upstairs to my bedroom, and I figured that we could just play video games. I talked to Jake for a while. I don't really remember much of the conversation though. Then we started gaming, and I was feeling a little bit better about him. He was decent at whatever games we played, and we didn't really have to talk much. We could just go on from one game to the next, and it's always nice to have somebody to game with. This was before online gaming was super popular, so multiplayer often meant having to actually have another person there in the room. At whatever time I usually went to bed, we stopped gaming, and Jake had a sleeping bag that he brought with him. Then I got into my bed and the lights went out. The next thing I remember was waking up when it was still dark out. I was like half awake and didn't know what was going on. After opening my eyes though, I noticed Jake standing in my bedroom. He was holding one of the little Nerf footballs that I had. He then walked over to my bedroom window and opened it up. Now, I was just laying there, still squinting my eyes from having just woken up. I didn't say anything or even move. After opening my bedroom window, Jake tossed the ball out of it. Then he walked over and grabbed another ball and tossed that out of the window as well. I really don't know why I just watched him, but my guess is that I was just so confused. That and the fact that I had literally just woken up from a deep sleep. Then Jake walked over and picked up my PlayStation, unhooking the controllers and other wires. I realized that he was probably going to toss that out of the window as well. When he was walking over to the window, I finally spoke up. I asked him what on earth he was doing. He then looked over at me surprised, as if he didn't expect me to wake up. Then he dropped my PlayStation on the ground right there, turned, and then he ran out of my bedroom. I was shocked. I got up and walked out of the room, and then heard our front door to the house opening. He had left the house entirely. I walked down and then I left the house to see where Jake had gone. When I got out into the front yard, I saw Jake sprinting into his yard and then entering his house. I was really weirded out by this. I went and got my Nerf balls that he dropped out the window. Then I went back inside and went back to bed. The next morning, I told my parents about it, who seemed to be just as confused as I was. We thought that maybe he was sleepwalking or something, but his parents never said anything about it before or after. For about 2 weeks, I didn't see Jake at all. I don't recall seeing his parents outside either. Then, the next time that I saw him was almost just as strange. One night, I was sitting in my bedroom playing video games like I often did. It was warm, so I went to open up my window to get a cool breeze. My window faced out the front yard, and as soon as I looked outside, I saw somebody standing in the front yard. I looked closer and realized that it was Jake. He was just standing there at the end of the front yard by the street, right next to the pine tree, and he appeared to be staring right at me. I kept looking at him for probably 10 seconds. Then, Jake turned and walked away. I didn't know what this kid's problem with me was. I checked out of my window several more times that night, but never saw him again. So, these events took place during the summertime. I was expecting that once the school year came around, he would probably be in my class. But his family ended up moving towards the end of the summer. I never did see him again after that. I still wonder why he acted that way and did those strange things. This is something that happened back in 2003. For some background details, I'm a female and was 12 years old at the time. I had a group of friends that I went to school with, and we would hang out together all the time. So one time, I remember I was at my friend Jen's house with a couple of other friends. There were maybe 4 or 5 of us. We were all going to be staying over for the night at Jen's. I remember that her parents' house was really nice, and they had this big living room. That's where we were going to sleep, and we all had sleeping bags, other than whoever would sleep on the couch. So I remember that we were hanging out, and as it got late, we were just watching TV and movies. Everyone else had gone to bed besides us by probably 11 o'clock. Now, I remember that a little while after that, another friend, Alyssa, that was with us, went to the kitchen. The kitchen was next to the dining room, which was directly next to the living room. Alyssa suddenly came back into the living room really fast, and she said that she saw a man in the window in the kitchen. At first, we thought that she had to be joking with us. I mean, it just seemed really unlikely. But Alyssa insisted that she was not joking, and I thought that either she was serious or a really good actor. She was telling us that she saw a guy walking past the window and then kind of look in at her. One of the lights in the kitchen was on, but it was dim. Outside, it was completely dark, so it would have been difficult to see any details about the man. After a small discussion in the living room, basically all of us went into the kitchen and looked. By now, there was nothing. No one was there. We then gathered back in the living room and talked about it some more. We were trying to figure out why somebody would be in the backyard. Jen said that she wasn't aware of anything like that happening before. Eventually, we just continued on what we were doing. I think we all figured it was maybe a neighbor cutting through the backyard or something. And probably a couple of hours went by. By about 1 o'clock in the morning, we were starting to get tired and going to go to sleep soon. I remember that I was thirsty and I went into the kitchen to get some water. Right when I walked in, I noticed through the back window there was a guy right there. I really couldn't believe it at first. He appeared to be looking in and was maybe a foot or 2 away from the window, but I really couldn't tell any details about what he looked like or anything. I immediately ran back into the living room and told everyone. At once, I think everybody got up and started running through the dining room to the kitchen. But again, when we got there, the man was gone. We looked out of the windows of the dining room, kitchen, and even the window in the living room, but did not see anybody. We stayed up for at least another hour talking about it. Finally, though, we were convinced that the man was gone for good this time. Everybody went to bed, including myself. We all woke up the next morning, and Jen's parents were making breakfast in the kitchen. I remember that we went in there to get something to eat. As a few of us were sitting around talking and eating, Jen's dad went outside to the patio from the kitchen. I'm not sure where he was going, but when he came back inside, he said that there were a bunch of marks at the back door. It was as if somebody was trying to get inside. So for the next few minutes after that, we were all talking about the man that we had seen. It seems as though he tried breaking in, but luckily he didn't. This happened one time when I was sleeping over at a friend's house. I think I was about 10 or so. I had a really good friend named Jordan back then, and I would go to his house sometimes to hang out. A few times I stayed overnight, and he lived pretty close to me. So I remember that one time when I went over to sleep over at his house, we were outside in the early afternoon. He lived in a pretty quiet neighborhood for the most part, but there were a lot of other houses nearby. Jordan's yard was fairly big, so we were outside playing some kind of sport. I remember that he had a neighbor directly across the street. The neighbor was a man who was somewhat thin and had kind of blonde, messy hair. I remember that when we were outside, the guy was just kind of standing around in his front yard and looking in our direction. Jordan told me that the guy always seemed odd to him. I didn't really ask why or anything, at least I don't remember. So I remember that the guy almost appeared to be watching us, which was strange. We moved into the backyard after that because he was kind of creeping us out, but it seemed like that sort of behavior was kind of normal for the guy. So eventually we went back inside, and were probably playing video games for the rest of the time. I just remember that when we went to bed, I was sleeping on the floor in my sleeping bag. I fell asleep rather quickly, but was awoken sometime in the night. I remember being wide awake when I woke up, so I just started looking around. Everything was dark and completely silent. The only noise was the sound of a highway getting an occasional vehicle off in the distance. I'm really not sure what time it was, but probably like 1 o'clock in the morning if I had to guess. Then I suddenly heard the sound of somebody walking inside of the house. It was like there was footsteps somewhere on the first floor. This immediately seemed odd to me. Things had been so quiet, and I knew Jordan's parents and sister had long gone to bed. I was hoping that maybe it was one of them. Then I heard the footsteps coming up the stairs and headed for the hallway that Jordan's bedroom was in. Jordan's room was at the very end of the hallway, so I could see the top of the stairs from where I was. As I was looking over, I soon saw a man walking up. He was moving pretty slowly, but I soon recognized that it was Jordan's neighbor from across the street. As soon as I saw this, I knew that I had to do something. Jordan's door had been opened for some reason, and I quickly left my sleeping bag, ran over to the door, and closed it. I then realized that there was actually a lock on his door, so I locked it. I heard the man walking down the hallway on the other side, and he seemed to be making a beeline for Jordan's room. I went over to Jordan's bed and shook him to wake him up. I then told him that I saw his neighbor inside the house. It was at about this time that the neighbor guy tried opening Jordan's bedroom door. With it being locked, it wouldn't open. Jordan was immediately just as scared as I was. We really didn't know what to do. There was no phone in Jordan's room, so we couldn't call the police. After trying the door a couple of times, the man stopped, and things were quiet for a few moments, but we did not hear him walk away. Then we heard this noise at the door. It sounded like the neighbor guy was perhaps trying to pick the lock on it. At least, that's what we both thought. He didn't have a key, but the door almost sounded like it was trying to be unlocked. At that point, Jordan just started yelling loudly. He started yelling for the man to leave, and also yelling to call the police, and I then joined in after him. Hopefully his parents would hear, and they had a phone in their bedroom. We were yelling that there was a man in the house and stuff. When this happened, not only did the noises at the door stop, but we then heard the guy starting to move away. Shortly after, we heard Jordan's parents get up, and a door to the house opened and closed. Jordan's parents came to his room and asked us what happened. When we told them, they of course called the police. The man had left and was not at his house when the police arrived. We talked with the police for a while and let them know everything that happened. Well, the next day I got picked up by my mom, and I heard from Jordan later on in the day that the police had arrested the man. That made us both feel a lot better. That was by far my craziest sleepover experience that I've ever had. This happened back when I was a kid. I was 12, and my best friend Ryan came over one Friday to sleep over. We would both hang out all the time. On this day in particular, he came over after school. That night, my parents and sister were gone at her soccer game until later, so it was just Ryan and I at the house. We were playing video games in the living room for most of the time. At probably like 8 p.m., there was a knock on the front door. It was really strange because we hardly ever had people knocking on our door. I paused the game and looked to the window. I couldn't see who was at the door from there, so I got up and walked over. Then I checked out of the living room window. There was some random guy there, and I had no idea as to who he was. I didn't get a very good look at him, but enough to tell that I didn't know him. He seemed a little bit sketchy too, so I chose not to answer it. I went back over to the TV, and Ryan and I continued gaming. The guy knocked at the door once more, but we still didn't bother to answer it. We hoped that he would go away and not stay there. Several minutes later, we hadn't heard anything, so I went over to the window to check. When I did, the man was gone. So after that, we figured that that was the end of it. Soon enough, Ryan's parents and sister got home. Ryan and I just kept playing video games, and we ended up staying up later than everybody else. So I remember that the later it got, the quieter things became, other than the TV. I don't know exactly what time it was, but we heard this noise coming from outside by the window. We both turned around at the same time to look. When we did, we saw this man at the window. It appeared to be the guy who had been at the door earlier. When we saw this, Ryan and I both sprinted out of the living room from my bedroom. When we went inside, literally right after that, we heard the sound of glass breaking coming from the living room. It sounded like the man had broken into the house. We locked the bedroom door, and luckily I did have a phone in there. We called the police, and I could hear the man just for a moment inside of the house. But things got really quiet after that. He didn't seem to go anywhere near the hallway where the bedrooms were. The police were fast to arrive and got there only about 5 minutes later. The next thing that I knew, they were inside of the house. My parents and sister got up from the commotion. When Ryan and I came out of my room, there were multiple cops in the house speaking with my parents. I found out that the man had been inside and was arrested. He was located hiding behind the living room couch. It was a crazy night, but after that, things were fine. Of course, we had to get the living room window replaced. I'm not really sure what the man was after or why he chose to break into our house. I really can't believe that he broke in. I'm glad that Ryan and I were able to get to my room and then call the police when we did. This happened just a few years ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Me and my friend Ethan had planned to have a sleepover at some point during the summer. Me and Ethan were pretty close friends ever since we met, and we liked hanging out with each other all the time. We were only 15 and 16 when this story occurred. On this day, I was outside playing basketball when I got a call from Ethan. He asked me if I wanted to come over for the night because his parents were on a weekend trip. I told him that I would ask my parents, and when I did, they said that I could go. It was a Friday, and we would be able to hang out for the weekend. I packed my stuff and left my house. Ethan's house was only about a half a mile away from my house, so I could just walk there and be there within 10 minutes. Things were peaceful and quiet while I walked, but about halfway through, I saw a man at the end of the road. He was walking in my direction, but was walking on the left side of the street, and I was on the right. I thought nothing of it, but then the man started walking towards me. I was really alarmed by this because I didn't know who it was. When he got closer, I could now see what the man looked like. He was very tall, maybe 6'4", and wore a green jacket and jeans. I wondered what he wanted, and was kind of getting freaked out because I was pretty short at 15 and only about 5'5". The man asked me where I was headed. I told him I was just going to a friend's house, and he just said, "Okay," and then continued walking. I found this really strange, but I just kept walking towards Ethan's house, which was now about 5 minutes away. When I got there, he was sitting on the couch waiting for me. We talked for about 10 minutes before turning on his Xbox and started playing video games. We ended up sitting there playing for a full 3 hours before getting tired. It was now about 9 p.m. or so, and we headed upstairs to Ethan's bedroom to decide how we would sleep. After that, we got pretty hungry, especially me, because I hadn't eaten anything in a long time. Ethan said he would order us a pizza since he didn't feel like cooking. Either that, or he probably didn't know how to cook. He was about to pick up his living room phone, when suddenly it started ringing. I was weirded out by this, but Ethan thought it was his parents, so he picked it up. When he did, all we heard was what sounded like somebody breathing on the other end. I just about had a heart attack when I heard this, but Ethan had a confused look on his face. He then hung up the phone and started to dial the number for the nearest pizza place. He ordered and then hung up, and they said that they would be there in about 15 minutes. When the pizza arrived, Ethan paid the delivery guy, and then he left. We turned the TV back on and decided to watch a movie until we finished the pizza. We watched about 30 minutes of it, and then turned it off and headed upstairs. We were both pretty tired and were going to go to bed. As soon as we went upstairs, though, we heard the living room phone ring again. We thought this was strange, and plus, it was pretty late at night. Ethan and I walked back downstairs to answer the phone, but when we did, we heard the same breathing from earlier. Now I was officially creeped out. Ethan was now really annoyed, and he told whoever it was to stop or he would call the police. Looking back, I don't know why he even said that, because when he did, I could see the fear in his face when the person on the other end of the phone spoke. He didn't harass Ethan or anything, but he did say something worse than that, at least in my opinion. The person on the phone said Ethan's real home address. As soon as he said that, Ethan had a face of fear and yelled at the person demanding what he was talking about. "Look outside your living room window," they said. When we did, our hearts dropped, and this is something that I'll never forget. Directly in the middle of Ethan's front lawn was a man. We couldn't believe what we were looking at. We couldn't even see who it was now because of how dark it was. Ethan hung up the phone and continued to stare at the person. This lasted for about 30 seconds, when suddenly, without warning, the man literally sprinted to the front door. When he reached it, he started slamming his whole body against it, over and over again. Ethan and I ran upstairs and locked ourselves in his parents' bedroom. Ethan then took out his cell phone and called the police. They said they would arrive in 5 minutes, and it made us feel a little bit better. About 3 minutes later, the man stopped slamming his body to the door, and we assumed that he left. About another 2 minutes later, the police arrived and did a search of the entire neighborhood, but couldn't find who the guy was. They told us that if anything else happened, to not hesitate to call again. When they left, we went back to Ethan's bedroom and talked about what had happened. I'll skip the entire conversation, but it will make a little more sense later. We were able to half sleep at around 12:30 or so. At around 3 in the morning, I was woken up by a knock at the front door. I woke up Ethan and we both headed downstairs. We looked out of the window again, but this time didn't see anyone. But when we looked at the front door, we could see who it was. We saw that it was the same man that messed with us just 3 hours ago. We ran upstairs and called the police. They said they were on their way, but I was still worried about the man trying to break in. There was also no way we were going to fight back because this guy was very tall. Like I said before, I was only 5'5" at 15, and Ethan was only 5'7" at 16. We stayed in his parents' bedroom for about 5 minutes until we heard the sound of glass breaking coming from the living room. The man walked around downstairs for about 3 minutes before heading upstairs. We ran to Ethan's parents' bathroom and hid in there. About 2 minutes later, we heard the police sirens coming from about a block away. The police were able to make it inside. Ethan and I walked out into the hallway and saw downstairs the police were holding the man, only something seemed familiar about him. My heart skipped a beat when I realized it was the same man who I had talked to on my way to Ethan's house. The police left with him, but we couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. At around 7 in the morning, I packed my stuff up and left. When I got back to my house, my parents were in the kitchen. They asked me how the sleepover was, and I said it was good because I didn't want to talk about it. Then I just went into my bedroom and laid on my bed, tired and exhausted. The next day, my parents got a call from Ethan's parents, and they told them that they didn't want me back at their house again. My mom looked confused when they said that and asked what they were talking about. They said that I broke the living room window, but I could hear Ethan telling his parents in the background that it wasn't me. I told my mom the whole story, and she believed me. They ended up arguing on the phone for a full 5 minutes before hanging up. That was the last time I went to Ethan's house, but at least we could have sleepovers at my house from that point on. I guess after the man continued walking after speaking to me, he must have followed me to Ethan's house, which explains how he got his address. Me and Ethan are still friends today, and nothing like that has ever happened since. To this day, I still wondered why the man followed me to his house. This is something that happened back when I was a kid. I believe I was about 8 or 9 years old. During that time, I had a lot of friends at school, and sometimes would hang out with them. One of my friends was named Adam, and he was having a birthday party that I got invited to. The party was on a Friday after school, and there was going to be a sleepover at Adam's house. Not that many other people were invited, I think just 5 or 6 people if my memory is correct. I knew most of the guys pretty well, but a few of them not so much. After school on Friday, I went home, and then my mom dropped me off at Adam's house sometime in the afternoon. I don't remember all that well what we did, but I know there was pizza and ice cream. That night, though, we all went into Adam's basement to watch a movie. We were all going to be sleeping in Adam's basement. It was pretty nice down there, and in the main living room area down there, they had a large TV. There were a few couches, and one person could sleep on each one. The rest of us would sleep on the floor in sleeping bags. After Adam's parents went to bed upstairs, all of the lights in the house were out, and we were watching the movie. Adam's basement was not completely below ground, so there was a little window near the top of the wall that was behind us. I remember that during the movie, for whatever reason, I randomly turned around and looked to the window. When I did, something caught my eye. I couldn't see all that well, but it looked like a man was looking in. I tapped on the shoulder of whoever was next to me. I don't remember who it was, but he looked back and we both saw the guy. That's when the kid next to me stood up. Everyone saw him stand up, and then he was like, "Who is that guy?" Everyone looked towards the window. The crazy part is that the guy was still there looking in. He didn't even move. He was definitely a grown man, but none of us recognized him. Everybody then started freaking out. We all ran upstairs, and Adam went to wake up his parents. About a minute later, Adam's parents went downstairs to look, but the man was gone by then. I remember that Adam's dad went outside with a flashlight and looked all around the house. He came back in maybe 5 minutes later and said whoever had been there was gone. I didn't know exactly what time it was then, but it was pretty late, maybe like 11 p.m. if I had to guess. Adam's parents asked all of us if anybody wanted to go home. They said they could call our parents, and if we didn't want to spend the night, it was fine. Everybody wanted to stay though. I think we all figured that it was some random guy looking in for whatever reason, and he wouldn't come back. Plus, there were like 6 of us, so it didn't feel quite that scary. After that, Adam's parents went back to bed, and all of us kids went back into the basement. There, we resumed our movie. Occasionally, I looked back at the window, as did a few other kids, but none of us saw the man at all. He seemed to be gone for good. After the movie, most of us got pretty tired. I was sleeping on the floor, and I got into my sleeping bag and quickly fell asleep. The next thing I remember is waking up. When I did, I remember noticing that it was still completely dark. I wanted to go back to sleep, but I wasn't really that tired. I sat up and looked around. That's when I saw the guy looking in the window again. He was just as he had been before. I couldn't believe it. I crawled over to whoever was closest to me, and it was a kid named Darian. I pointed to the window, and when Darian saw it, he started running for the stairs. I followed him, and when we made it up, Darian began knocking on Adam's parents' bedroom door. They soon woke up, and after we told them that the guy was back, they called the police. We went back downstairs, and the guy was now gone once more. The police came out, and everybody woke up. The man was not found, though, and had left. We all stayed up for the rest of the night. I think it was like 4 a.m. when the guy came back the second time. After that, all of our parents were called pretty early in the morning, and they came and got us. I would guess that the man never went back to Adam's house after that. If he did, I think Adam would have told me. That was definitely the scariest experience I've ever had at a sleepover, though. When I was a kid, my best friend's name was Will. Will and I would stay over at each other's houses all the time. It was always a lot of fun when we would have sleepovers, and usually we would watch movies or play video games. This happened when we were both 11 years old. I remember that I went over to Will's house to spend the night. He lived just a few miles from me, and Will had a kind of large backyard. There was also a bit of a woods back there as well. After I went to Will's house, we probably just played video games. That's what we usually did. I remember that his parents went to bed, but we stayed up late. We were in Will's bedroom, and he had a TV in his room. At probably like 1 o'clock in the morning, we were still gaming and going strong. It was the summertime, and we didn't have school the next day or anything. But also because it was summer, Will's room got kind of hot. I remember he walked over to open up his window because it was cool at night outside. There was also a breeze, but after opening up his window, I heard him say, "That's weird." I wondered what exactly he was talking about. When I asked him, he said that he thought he saw somebody in his backyard. I got up and walked over to him to look. We hadn't been able to see out of his window because he always had it covered with a blanket. He also didn't have a great view of things unless you were standing right by the window and looking out of it. When I looked, I didn't see anybody. Will said that the guy was gone now. There were quite a few trees and bushes in Will's backyard. Hearing that Will thought he saw a man back there was creepy, but it was also kind of exciting. I asked Will where he was and what he looked like and stuff. Will said that he only saw the guy for like a second, and he went behind one of the trees, so he didn't get a good look. He also said that he was kind of far away. We kept watching the window for quite a while, but didn't see anything. Will then asked me if I wanted to go out there. I guess we were feeling brave. I said yes. It was really dumb looking back, and we should have just stayed inside, but we decided to go outside and look around to make sure that things were okay. We left Will's bedroom and walked through his house to the back door. We decided to go out of the back door for his garage, which was connected to the house. After we got outside, it was very dark and quiet. There was the sound of leaves rustling in the wind, but that was it. We walked close to the house at first, just looking around. Everything seemed fine. We quickly went from feeling kind of nervous to relaxed. It seemed like whoever was in the backyard was gone now. We walked a little bit farther out into Will's backyard and got kind of distracted by finding one of Will's footballs. It was lying behind a tree from where we had lost it in the yard not long before. Will picked it up and threw it at me. We started to toss the ball around a little bit, and we kind of wandered off to the back part of his yard by the woods. It was then that we heard a noise coming from sort of by the house. We looked back and saw a man coming out behind a bush about 10 feet from the side of his house. The guy then went right up next to his house and on the side of it. He then disappeared out of our sight. The man did not look in our direction, and we didn't know if he knew we were back here or not. There was a good chance that he had heard us, though. We were probably at least 100 feet away. Now we were in a tough spot. We wanted to go back inside, but we're so far away from the house. Will said that we had to go back, but I didn't want to go near the guy. The back door to the garage that we came out of was also unlocked. I just hoped that the man wouldn't go over there. The good thing for us was that the garage door was on the opposite side of the house where the man was. By now, the guy was long out of our sight and had disappeared on the side of the house. We didn't know if he was in the front yard now or still on the side. Will and I decided to run back. He counted to 3, and then we both took off, sprinting as fast as we possibly could for the back door. I didn't look in the direction where the man had gone the entire time. I didn't want to know where he was. Pretty soon, we made it to the back door. Will and I both went in as fast as we could, and then closed it. Will locked the door as soon as we were inside the garage. It was a crazy adrenaline rush, and for just a second when we made it in, I felt relieved. But then, we heard the doorknob turn. This was probably less than 5 seconds after Will had locked the door. I couldn't believe it. Will and I ran back to the door leading inside of his house and went inside. We made sure to lock that door as well, and then Will ran up to his parents' bedroom and woke them up. Within minutes, the police were called, and Will and I were hiding under his bed. The police got there a short time later and searched the entire property, but never found the guy. He must have left. We answered questions as best we could, but we never had a very good look at the guy. We only saw him at a long distance and in the dark. I really couldn't tell any significant details about him. After the police left, we finally went to sleep. The guy never returned, luckily. I went to Will's house countless more times after that, and stayed over many times as well. Nothing like that ever happened again. This is the story of the strangest sleepover I ever had. It takes place probably in like 2009 when I was 12 years old. I could be wrong on the year, but that's my best guess. I have an older sister who's 3 years older than I am. She did a lot of activities growing up and had a lot of friends. I remember that at one point, she made a new friend. I don't even know where, and I don't remember the friend's name, but it was through one of her many activities, like dance or gymnastics or something. I just know that it wasn't through school, because I was told they didn't go to the same school. My sister went to this girl's house maybe once or twice, and I remember my sister telling me that the girl had a brother around my age. She said that he seemed kind of weird though. I didn't think much of it, but about a week later, my sister got invited to her house for a sleepover. I remember her asking my mom, and then my sister said that the girl's brother wanted me to come sleep over as well. This confused me because I had never met the kid. It seemed strange to have a sleepover the first time hanging out. My mom asked me if I wanted to go, and at first, I said that I didn't. I would rather stay home and play video games, but my mom told me that I might enjoy it and make a new friend. I decided to have an open mind and go with my sister. Maybe he was cool and we would end up becoming best friends. So that Friday, my mom drove us to their house and dropped my sister and I off. My sister's friend lived kind of on the other side of town, probably like 10 minutes away. We went inside and I met the kid, whose name was Luke. He seemed pretty normal to me at first. His parents were nice, and so was his sister. After meeting everyone, our sisters went off on their own, and I went into Luke's bedroom with him. When we were inside of his bedroom, he didn't really talk to me. I asked him a couple of questions, but he didn't seem that friendly at all, to be honest. He also didn't really seem like the type of person that I would be friends with. We didn't seem to have the same interests. I was really into sports and things like that, and I didn't see any sports stuff around his room at all. I asked him if he liked sports, and he said, "No, I hate them." It was a bit of a letdown for me, but I thought maybe we would have some common ground. To be honest though, the kid didn't really seem like he wanted me there at all. It was kind of awkward. He wasn't saying anything, and we were both just standing there looking around. Finally, Luke said that we should go to the park. I thought this was a little bit odd because the sun was going to be setting soon. I said sure though, and he told me that there was a cool park that he goes to all the time. We left his bedroom and then walked down the hallway and outside of his house. I remember wondering if we should tell his parents that we were leaving or something. Luke didn't seem concerned about it at all though, so I figured it was all right. We walked down his street to the end of it. Then we turned and walked down another street. We soon went down several more streets. It ended up taking like 20 minutes to get to the park and was a lot farther than I thought it would be. When we got to the park, it was pretty standard. There was a spot with monkey bars and slides and stuff, and then a little field with picnic tables. The whole park was between several residential streets. After a few minutes in the park, Luke pointed to a tree a ways away. He told me to go over there and said there was something cool. I walked over to the tree, not really knowing why. When I got pretty far away from him, I asked him what was over here. He told me to look behind the tree, so I did. There was nothing there though. It was just a random tree in the middle of the park. I looked back over at Luke and yelled, asking him what was over here. When I looked to Luke, though, I saw him running away. He was just about out of the park already, and he quickly disappeared around the corner. I was so confused. I looked all around, and the park was now completely empty. I then walked over to where Luke had left the park. He was nowhere to be seen. I yelled his name as loud as I could several times, but I got nothing in response. By now, it was starting to get dark out. I tried to remember the way that we had come to the park, but I really had no clue. I wasn't very good with directions at that age. I started walking in what I thought was the correct way back. Here and there, I would yell Luke's name, but I never got a response. I kept walking from one street to another. They were all residential and looked similar. There were also lots of streets around there. They were very quiet as well. Pretty soon, it was completely dark out, and I had no clue where I was. Plus, I had no cell phone back then. I wandered around the streets, hoping to get lucky and find Luke's house. I was walking around the streets for probably an hour at least. I was getting more and more worried the longer I was out there. Soon, I saw a small gas station that was on a busier street about a block away. I had the idea to go there and see if I could use a phone. I went inside and asked the clerk who was behind the counter if there was a phone that I could use. She asked me what was going on, and I told her what had happened. She let me use her own personal cell phone, and I called my parents. My mom came to the gas station and picked me up. She then called Luke's mom. Apparently, Luke was back home and had been there for a while. Luke had told his mom that I just decided to go home, and I just left. I was really angry about it, and I went home with my mom and played video games for the rest of the night. Looking back, I'm still mad at that Luke kid. I haven't seen him since, but he just led me to the park and left me there, knowing I wouldn't know how to get back. I really hope he's changed and is a better person now. I also think that his parents didn't handle the situation very well. They didn't question it when he told them that I just left. They should have called my parents or something. Anyways, it was a very strange experience to say the least. One time back in high school, my best friend Kenzie was going to sleep over at my house. I lived with my parents at the time, and I'm an only child. I remember that on this night, Kenzie had soccer until a little bit later. She played soccer in high school and was in a sort of rec league during the off-season. My parents both worked really early in the morning and usually went to bed at like 9 o'clock. So after that, I was the only one up, and I was in my bedroom watching TV. Kenzie got to my house at probably 9:30 and then went upstairs to my room. It was a weekend, and we would stay over at each other's houses all the time on weekends. After Kenzie came up to my room, we talked for a while. It was probably 15 minutes or so after she got there, at almost 10 p.m., when I heard the front door opening. It was downstairs, and we both heard it very clearly. Immediately, I got a bad feeling. I quickly tried to make sense of it, and figured that maybe my dad got up for some reason. I didn't really know why he would go outside, though. We both stopped talking and listened to downstairs. Shortly after the door opened, we heard it close, and then we just barely heard some footsteps. It was as if somebody had just entered the house. It couldn't be my dad. Plus, I would have heard my dad going down the stairs first if it was. I had no idea who it could be. Then, Kenzie told me that she thought she might have left the front door unlocked when she came into the house. I had left it unlocked for her. We quickly both became very nervous. We listened and didn't really hear any noises. After several minutes, I decided to look. I opened up my bedroom door quietly and tiptoed down the hallway to where I could look down the stairs. I peeked around the corner and saw part of the hallway, kind of by the kitchen and front door. For a while, I saw nothing. Then, suddenly, a man appeared from around the corner. He wasn't looking at me, but as soon as I saw him come into my view, I jumped back and ran back into my bedroom. I closed the door and grabbed my phone to call the police. I told Kenzie that I had seen a man down there. We both hid inside my bedroom closet and waited. But just barely as we hid in there, I heard the front door open and close again. I was pretty sure that the guy had left, whoever he was. I left my room and went just across the hall to wake up my parents. Then I went back into my bedroom, and we all waited in our rooms until the police got there. When they did arrive, the intruder was gone. Nothing was stolen or out of place either. It was very strange. Obviously, he had walked in because the door was unlocked, but I still don't know how he knew to go into our house. Did he know that the door would be left unlocked? And why did he enter the house if he didn't bother to steal anything? I don't know, and I may never know. Nothing like that happened again. This was years ago now, but I will never forget it. Back when I was a kid, I used to have sleepovers with my best friend all the time. His name is Joe, and we remain friends to this day. I'm guessing I was like 10 or 12 at the time. I really don't know exactly what year it was, but I remember that night really well. It was the summertime, and we were having some really nice weather. I went over to Joe's house, along with my older sister. Joe also had an older sister that was my sister's age, and they were also best friends. So all four of us were at Joe and his sister's house, and my sister and I were going to spend the night. For most of the day, Joe and I were outside playing basketball in the driveway. He lived in what I would describe as a pretty typical neighborhood. There were many other houses on the street, and they all had around the same size house and yard. The backyard was not very big, but was fenced in, separating it from his neighbors. There was enough space to play catch and things like that, though. I remember that we went inside for a while to eat, and we were playing some video games. Then somebody, I'm not sure who exactly, had the idea to sleep outside in tents. Joe's family went camping sometimes, so they had a few tents in the garage. I know it was either Joe's or my sister who had the idea, and Joe's parents thought it would be really fun as well. Joe and I would probably rather stay in and play video games until we got too tired to stay awake, but we ended up agreeing. We all took 2 tents and set them up probably 50 feet away from each other at the end of Joe's backyard. One was for us, and the other was for our sisters. We took out sleeping bags as well, and then Joe's parents made a campfire. They had a little fire pit, and we roasted marshmallows and made s'mores. When it got late, Joe's parents put out the fire and went inside. Then it was time for us kids to go to bed. Joe and I got inside our tent, and we went into our sleeping bags. I remember we played on our Game Boy Advances for a while. It was really quiet out there. We could hear our sisters talking in the distance from their tent at first. Eventually, they must have went to sleep, because things got really quiet. Joe and I were still up, though, and playing our video games. Then, we suddenly heard a noise, as if somebody was walking in the yard and approaching our tent. They were walking slowly, but the strange part was that they were coming from the back side of the yard, not from the direction that the house was in. At first, we assumed it was one of our sisters. They were probably trying to scare us. Still, I had a bad feeling about it for some reason. Joe and I whispered to each other, asking if we had heard that. I remember Joe saying that it was his sister confidently, as if he knew that's who it was for sure. But for some reason, I didn't believe him. Then, suddenly, we could see the shadow of who was there. It certainly wasn't his sister. The shadow appeared to be of a grown man. We were both frozen with fear. The shadow got closer until it was right outside of our tent. The guy stood there for the longest time, but didn't open the tent. Then he started walking away. But he was walking closer to the house, or possibly towards our sister's tent. Joe and I moved over to the end of the tent, and we quietly unzipped it to get a look at who was there. I remember that we both stuck our heads out to look. We thought we were being inconspicuous, but apparently we were not. As soon as we saw the guy, he was like 20 feet away, halfway between our tent and our sister's. He immediately started sprinting to the end of the yard and hopped the fence like it was nothing. Neither Joe or me got a good look at the guy's face. He pretty much turned away as soon as he saw us. After that, we all went inside. I felt much more safe in there. I don't think the guy ever came back, but I'm really glad that he left when he did. I remember when I was 8 years old, I got invited to a birthday slumber party. Something really strange happened, and I haven't told anybody about it to this day, so I'm deciding to write about it now. The party was for one of my friends. I wasn't the closest friends with him, but I was certainly in his friend group. We were classmates, and I remember being really excited for the party. It was the first time I would be staying overnight at anybody's house other than my best friend. The party was on a Friday to a Saturday. After school, I went home and then got ready. The party started at 5 p.m. at my friend's house. When I got there were a few of their kids there already, and I knew most of them. A couple of people got there after me, and there was a total of 8 of us. My friend's brother and sister were also there, so it was a pretty large group. I remember that his parents took both of their cars. Half of us piled into one and half into the other. We went to a nearby Pizza Hut and got pizza and soda there. After that, we went back to my friend's house. That's when there was cake and presents and all that stuff. We were all going to be sleeping in the basement. I remember that the house was a split level, so when you walked in, there was a little area and then stairs going both up and down. The basement was a big open space, but had a few connecting rooms. When we all got down there, we had our own sleeping bags, and we set them up all over the basement. I put mine near a wall, and I happened to be closest to the stairs.
We all started playing video games down there, and I remember they had multiple TVs set up. They had a GameCube going, a Nintendo 64, and somebody even brought a PlayStation. It was a lot of fun, and it went late into the night. Finally, I'm not even sure what time it was, but if I had to guess, it was maybe 2 a.m. The TVs finally went off, and everybody went inside their sleeping bags and fell asleep. Everybody except me, that is. I was laying down with my eyes closed, but was unable to fall asleep. I'm not really sure why, but I just wasn't really that tired. I laid there with my eyes closed for the longest time, and eventually I sat up and looked around. It was dark and completely silent. Everybody else was fast asleep. I kind of had to use the bathroom though, probably from all the Mountain Dew I had been drinking. There was a bathroom in the basement, but I would have to step over multiple people to get to it. Rather than risk waking them up, I had easy access to the stairs, and I decided to use the upstairs bathroom instead. I got up and walked up the first set of stairs into the foyer near the front door. In that area was where everyone left their shoes. There was also a coat closet and a window next to the front door as well. When I got up there, I immediately saw a man's face looking in the window. I was shocked, and I sprinted up the rest of the stairs. Once I was up there, I quickly ran down the hallway and into the bathroom. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. I didn't know who the man was looking in the window, but I was certain that he was not supposed to be there. I used the restroom, but before I left, I had to psych myself into going back downstairs. The man might still be looking in, and I did not want to walk past him again. I opened the bathroom door and walked out. I soon made it to the top of the stairs. That's when I heard a quiet knock on the front door. It wasn't loud enough to wake anybody up, but it was certainly loud enough for me to hear it. I was really freaked out now. I waited at the top of the stairs. I stood there for probably 2 or 3 minutes. The guy knocked again. Finally, I made a run for it. I went down the stairs as fast as I could, and I told myself not to look at the window. When I was almost at the bottom of the stairs though, of course, I looked at the window. Nobody was there at first, but then quickly the man appeared again. He was looking right at me. I ran even faster and went all the way down the next set of stairs back into the basement. Everything in the basement was still silent and dark. Everybody was still asleep. The window to outside was just barely out of my view. I was glad that I couldn't see the man. I heard another quiet knock from the front door though. Then I heard the knob to the door turn as if the man was trying to get inside. I had no idea who this guy was or what he was doing. I did my best to fall back asleep, but I still couldn't. By now, I was probably even more awake from seeing the guy than ever. I heard him around the front door, knocking quietly on the door or window or trying to open the door. That lasted for probably 10 or 15 minutes until things finally went quiet again. I was thinking about waking somebody up, and I almost did, but I decided not to. There were a couple of windows in the basement. The basement was only like half underground in the front. These windows had blinds covering them though. But only about 10 minutes after I stopped hearing the noises around the front door, I started hearing a quiet knock at the window. This lasted about 5 minutes before going back to the front door area. I closed my eyes and covered my ears. I did my best not to think about it and to try and fall asleep somehow. Eventually, I did. When I woke up the next morning, it was 8 a.m. and most of the other kids were awake. We all went upstairs and had pancakes for breakfast. Shortly after that, everybody's parents started coming to pick them up. My dad came and picked me up, and I went home. I never told anybody about the man that I had seen. I'm not really sure why I didn't tell anyone, but I just didn't. Soon after, I forgot about it, but over the years, I've remembered it, and I think about it time and time again. I still wonder who the guy was and what he was doing. Was he trying to break in, or was he just messing around? I just know that he really scared me that night. My scariest experience at a sleepover happened back when I was 12. I was sleeping over at my friend Jeffrey's house. This was a long time ago, but I still remember it well. I would stay over at Jeffrey's house all the time. We would usually play video games until we got tired and then go to sleep. The nice thing was that Jeffrey had a bunk bed, so I didn't have to bring a sleeping bag or anything. I would sleep on the bottom bunk, and he would always sleep on the top. I'm not really sure why he had a bunk bed, because he didn't have any siblings, but I think he just wanted one because he thought it was cool. Anyways, on this particular night, we were playing on Jeffrey's Xbox 360. There was this game called Banjo-Kazooie that we always liked to play back then, and I remember we played that game late into the night. We were having popcorn, and that's when I remember that Jeffrey said he thought he heard a noise. I hadn't heard anything though. He asked me if I had heard what he did, and I said no. He then paused the game, so I knew he was serious. We both listened. Then, I did hear something. It was coming from outside, just past the bedroom window. There was a large bush, and it was moving. He had shades covering most of the window, but there was a small opening. We thought maybe an animal was there at first. However, the way the movements and sounds were, it seemed more like a person. We both went to the window and looked out, but didn't see anything. We looked out there for a good 2 or 3 minutes. After that, we went back to playing video games. At that time, it was just past midnight. We played the game for about 5 more minutes before hearing the bush move again. We paused the game once more and listened. Then, we both saw somebody walk past the window. We saw it clearly through the maybe foot-tall gap in the blinds covering the window. Jeffrey got up and closed the blinds completely. He then said to me, "Did you see that?" I told him yes. We didn't get a good look at whoever the guy was at all. We couldn't see his face or anything like that. Still, we knew that somebody was there, and we knew that nobody was supposed to be there. Jeffrey's neighborhood was pretty typical. There was a decent amount of houses on his street, and the yards had a little bit of space. Stuff like this never happened though. I asked him what we should do. By this time, Jeffrey's parents had long gone to bed. All of the rest of the lights in the house were out, and it was completely quiet. Just a small lamp in the corner of Jeffrey's bedroom was the only light. Jeffrey then went over and turned it off. Now the only light was coming from the TV screen. We decided that we were going to be quiet and listen to see if the guy would come back. After a couple of minutes of nothing, we got up to investigate the rest of the house. We walked slowly and as quietly as we could. We went out into the hallway and down to the living room. Then we looked out the windows there. We still didn't see anything. Even into the kitchen, and looked out just about every window of the house. Of course, we couldn't see everywhere, but we didn't see the guy at all. But we felt better and thought that maybe whoever had been there had left. Then we quietly walked back up to Jeffrey's bedroom again. We decided that we would go back to playing our video games. But right as we unpaused the game, we heard the sound of glass breaking. It was coming from the complete opposite end of the house. Jeffrey got up and closed his door quickly. He then said to hide. We both ran to his bunk bed and hid underneath it. There was enough space under there for both of us to fit, and we covered the side with blankets. We first heard some noises in the house, but stopped hearing anything a short time later. The good news is that whoever was in the house was not walking closer to us. Still, we weren't sure what to do. We didn't have cell phones, and the nearest home phone was in Jeffrey's parents' bedroom. After hiding under the bed for a good 5 minutes, Jeffrey said he was going to make a run for it to wake his parents up. He told me to wait there and keep hiding. 2 of us going in there would cause more noise, he said. He quietly got up and went to the door. We knew that opening the door would be the toughest part, and when Jeffrey opened it, I was half expecting to see the man right there on the other side. But thankfully, he wasn't. We didn't see the man, and Jeffrey quickly snuck down the hall into his parents' bedroom, which was really close by. Unfortunately for me, Jeffrey didn't come back right away, and I had to wait in his bedroom by myself. I was scared out of my mind. If the door opened, I wouldn't know if it would be Jeffrey again or whoever else was in the house. I didn't really hear any noises though. I waited there, hidden under the bed, for probably 10 whole minutes. Then, the door suddenly opened. I didn't want to look. A few seconds later though, the covers moved right by my face. I looked, and it was Jeffrey. He told me that the police were now there. Then, I was able to get out from under the bed. I was surprised that I had heard nothing, but the police were in fact there. They were able to locate the man in the house, and he had actually gone down into the basement and was hiding in there. He broke in through the back kitchen window, which was pretty big. Looking back at that night, I'm really glad that Jeffrey and I had stayed up playing video games so late. If not, we probably wouldn't have heard the guy break in. I went to Jeffrey's house many times after that. We always talk about that from time to time, and I'm glad everyone is okay.
Back when I was in elementary school, I had a lot of different friends. During those times, I went to several sleepovers, usually with my best friend James or some of my other good friends. At one point during 5th grade, though, I remember that I had a friend named Orion. I was pretty good friends with Orion, but not like best friends or anything. I thought he was cool, though. He was one of my newer friends because the previous year was his first at my school. I'd been to his house once before for his birthday, and I think his parents were rich or something because their house was super nice. He also had all the latest video games and a giant TV. So one day, he invited me over to have a sleepover at his house, and I was really excited. His mom called mine later in the day, and then the next day, I went to his house after school. When I got to Orion's house, I was surprised to see 2 other kids there. There were 2 guys who seemed to be our age, but I didn't recognize them. They weren't Orion's brothers because I knew he was an only child. He introduced me to them and said they were his friends from his last school. Their names were Joey and Thomas. I had no idea that Orion was having other friends over as well. It made me a little less comfortable because I didn't know these guys, but I figured that it would still be fun. Orion kind of started talking to Joey and Thomas and didn't seem to pay as much attention to me. He talked about things that I didn't really know about, and I felt like the odd man out. We played video games, but had to take turns because there were 4 of us and only 3 controllers. After hours of that, we finally decided to go to bed. We were all going to sleep in Orion's basement. They had a big room with several couches and also had a couple of air mattresses. 2 of us would take the 2 couches, and the other 2 would take the 2 air mattresses. I took the couch which was on the end of the room, closest to the stairs. I really didn't know what time it was when we all went to sleep, but it had to be pretty late. At one time during the night, I woke up. When I did, I saw that Thomas was crouched down at the end of the couch that I was sleeping on. He appeared to be going through my backpack. I mostly had school stuff inside of it, but had a bunch of other stuff as well. I was confused as to why he was doing this. Before I had a chance to sit up or ask him what he was doing, he stood up with my backpack in hand and walked out of the room. I sat up looking around wondering what Thomas, a kid I barely knew, was doing with my backpack. Everybody else was sleeping. About a minute later, I heard his footsteps coming back and I pretended to be asleep. When he was back in the room, I opened my eyes to see. I saw Thomas, but he no longer had my backpack, and my backpack was not back at the end of the couch either. Then, Thomas got back to his air mattress and went back to sleep. I fell asleep again shortly after, and the next morning when I woke up and my backpack still wasn't there, I confronted Thomas. In front of everybody after we were all up, I asked Thomas why he took my backpack during the night. I said that I had seen him. He started laughing, but I could tell in his face that he was nervous. He said that he never touched my backpack, and he didn't know what I was talking about. I described to him in detail what I saw, but he still denied it, and he started to get mad at me as well. I asked him where my backpack was, and then showed everyone how mine wasn't there. They suggested that I didn't even bring a backpack. Now this really made me bad, because it seemed like Joey and Orion were both taking Thomas's side. I told them that I was going home, and I needed my backpack. Then I called my mom. She came to pick me up, and even went inside Orion's house, and we both looked for it. But eventually, Orion's parents basically kicked us out and said that if it turned up, they would call us. I went home furious. Obviously, I had taken my backpack to Orion's house because I had gone there straight from school, and I always brought my backpack to school. Inside of my backpack, it was mainly school stuff like notebooks, folders, and pencils, but I also had some things of value, such as my Nintendo DS and several games for it, and other little knickknacks and some food. I told my mom all about what had happened, and she told me she would call Orion's parents again the next day if they didn't find it. This was a Saturday, and the next day, on Sunday, when I woke up, I went outside, and on the front step of my house was my backpack. However, it was open and emptied out, except for the school supplies. Literally everything was gone from it other than my notebooks, folders, and pencils. I was livid. The next day at school, I told Orion all about it, and surprisingly, he still took the side of his friend Thomas. He said that he had no clue how my backpack would end up at my front step, and then he got mad at me for accusing Thomas of stealing from me, and said that Thomas was his best friend. That basically ended our friendship, and I never hung out with him again, and barely even spoke to him for the next 2 years until he changed schools again. I really don't know who left my backpack at my front step. There's no way that Thomas would know where I lived. Overall, this was one of the creepiest things to happen to me. This story happened about a year ago. I worked for a company where I would have to travel occasionally for work projects. During one work project in particular, I carpooled and traveled with a coworker named Jake to an area about 4 hours away. I will start out by saying that even before my trip, my overall impressions of Jake were that he was sort of weird. I wasn't all that excited about the idea of just he and I traveling together for work, but when Jake asked me to carpool with him, I just said, sure. Immediately, I hated myself for saying yes so fast, but I didn't want to insult him by saying no, plus he offered to do all the driving. I figured that without having to drive, I could tolerate him, and we left that morning and had a long and busy day of work. By the time we were done on location, we had some things that we needed to wrap up. Ideally, we would do this back at the office, but we were 4 hours away and it was already 7 p.m. We drove back and got within about an hour away, but we were both really tired. Jake said that he thought he was too tired to make it back to the office. However, his apartment was only 20 minutes down the road and said I could sleep over if I wanted. The truth is, I didn't want to, but I didn't really have a choice and figured it wouldn't be too bad, so I agreed. When we got to his apartment, I saw that there was already a sleeping bag next to his couch. He said I could sleep in the sleeping bag on the couch, and overall his place was decent. I pretty much went right to bed after the long day of work, but I woke up suddenly from my deep sleep. The sleeping bag that I was in was as if it was zipped shut completely. It was over my head and I couldn't see anything. I felt around to try to lift the sleeping bag from where my head was, but I couldn't find the top of it. Then I realized what was going on. The top of the sleeping bag was being held shut. It was really hot in there and I was sweating. I also felt like I was running out of air. I tried sitting up, but it was difficult. I was still being held down, and I realized that somebody must be holding the top of the sleeping bag closed. I started hitting at the area and trying to wiggle myself off the couch. At last, I was able to escape. Whoever had been holding the sleeping bag closed was now gone. When I felt the cool, fresh air from the rest of the room hit me, it was refreshing. But as I did, I looked around the very dark living room, and I saw what appeared to be Jake disappearing into the hallway towards his bedroom, and then I heard the door quietly close and lock. Why had Jake done this to me? Was he joking or was he serious? It definitely wouldn't be a good joke to nearly suffocate someone and then run away in the middle of the night. I was wide awake now, and I looked at the clock. It was 5 a.m., and I had been sleeping for a good 6 hours or so. We would have to leave for work in only a few more hours, so I just went on my phone and stayed up for the rest of the night. I really didn't want to take a risk going back to sleep after what had just happened. When it was about 7 a.m., I got ready to leave and waited for Jake to get up. He got up several minutes later and asked if I was ready to go, then we left. I didn't want to bring up the night before of what had happened, and I was wondering if he would, but he didn't. We drove the next 30 minutes to work in almost silence, and it was pretty awkward. After we got to work, we finished up the project, and thankfully, I didn't have to work with Jake for the rest of the day or the next day. And after that, I never saw him again. Like 2 weeks later, when I hadn't seen him at all, I asked a coworker who told me that Jake had been fired. I wasn't able to find out from anybody why he was fired though, but I was glad that he was gone. I remember that I had been friends with him on Facebook, so I searched for him, but he was now gone from Facebook. I thought maybe he deleted me, but after searching, I still couldn't find him. I'm not sure what happened to him or where he went, but I'm almost certain that he tried to suffocate me that night. Many years ago, when I was about 12 years old, I had a sleepover at my best friend Kevin's house. Kevin was my best friend from the time I was about 5 years old until probably college. We are still friends to this day. We had countless sleepovers at either my house or his house, which were only a few miles apart from each other. Typically, it would be on a weekend, like a Friday night to Saturday, and I remember that one Friday, I went over to his house after school. Kevin's house was a split level. His bedroom was on the upstairs, and in the basement was where we hung out a lot. I really liked his basement because they had a bunch of snacks, a big fridge, and of course, a TV and video games. We went down there first and hung out for a while. I remember that Kevin's mom had to go take his sister somewhere, and his dad was at one of his friends' houses. We played video games into the night, and when it was dark out at probably like 8 p.m., all of a sudden we heard a noise coming from the door leading outside from the basement. We both paused the game and looked up at the same time. I think we both asked each other, "Did you hear that?" It was pretty unlikely that Kevin's parents or sister would be trying to enter through the back sliding door in the basement. Neither of us could see to the door from where we were, but it was just around the corner. Kevin slowly got up and peeked around the corner and motioned for me to wait where I was. When he did, he came sort of running back. He said that there was a guy there. I couldn't resist, and I got up and peeked around the corner as well. Kevin was right. There was a man standing at the back door, but it was really dark, and I couldn't tell any details about him. I ran back, and I don't think the man saw us, but to be honest, I really have no clue. We tried to figure out what to do. Neither Kevin or I had a cell phone, but luckily, there was a home phone in the basement. Kevin got it and called his dad and told him what was going on. He said his dad was coming home and should be back in like 10 minutes. In the meantime, we had to figure out what to do. I looked again to see if the guy was still there, and he was. We heard him try opening the door again. Thank goodness it was locked. Kevin and I didn't want to stay downstairs any longer, and we both ran upstairs. We went into Kevin's bedroom and shut the door. From there, we couldn't hear the man trying to open the door anymore, but we figured that we would be able to hear him if he got inside the house. Not too long after, we heard the front door opening, and then heard the voice of Kevin's dad. We went downstairs and showed him where we had seen the man, but the man was now gone. Kevin's dad went outside and looked all around the yard, which was about an acre. He came back a while later, saying whoever was there was now gone and he probably wouldn't come back. After that, Kevin and I played a little more video games until it got late. Then we went up to go to bed. Kevin actually had a bunk bed. I'm not sure why, because he had the whole room to himself. But I slept on the bottom bunk and Kevin slept above. It took me a while to fall asleep. Kevin seemed to fall asleep pretty quick, but I just wasn't quite as tired. I laid in bed relaxing and trying to get tired, but then I heard another noise. It broke the complete silence in Kevin's house. It was the sound of something hitting Kevin's bedroom window. Then I heard it again. I looked to the window, but saw nothing. My heart started racing, and I was telling myself that it was nothing, but I wanted to be certain, so I got up and went over to the window and looked outside. But when I did, I saw a guy standing down below looking right up at me. I jumped back and ran and woke up Kevin. He was super confused at first, but then got up and looked out the window. The man was still there. Kevin ran to his parents' room and woke them up. I stayed at the window and looked outside. The man was walking closer to the house, and before long, Kevin's parents entered the room and his dad walked over to the window. At that point, the man turned and ran away. The police were called, but when they arrived, the guy was long gone. The man didn't return for the rest of the night, and I went home the next morning. I was glad that I didn't live at Kevin's house, because I would have been really afraid that the guy would return. However, I never heard Kevin mention anything about him again.
When I was about 10 years old, I went to one of my best friend's houses to hang out and then have a sleepover. I stayed over at his place all the time, and he occasionally stayed over at my place as well. His name was Robert, and we were both really into sports and played on the same football and baseball teams. Robert's dad would always throw to us football passes or pitch batting practice to us at his house, which was always fun. But on this time, he was out of town on business. Anyways, on this particular night, we played video games like we often did, until Robert's mom came upstairs to his room and told us both that it was time for bed. We both got ready for bed, and Robert went into his bed and I got in my sleeping bag on the floor. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but woke up sometime later. I groggily turned over to my other side and got comfortable again. It was pitch black, but my eyes slowly adjusted. As they did, I noticed a man in the hallway just outside of Robert's room. I assumed it was Robert's dad, and then I just closed my eyes and went back to sleep. The next morning, Robert and I got up and had some cereal. He mentioned that his dad was coming back home today, and that's when I suddenly remembered about the man I had seen in the hallway last night. It hit me that it couldn't have been Robert's dad, as he was out of town. I thought maybe I was dreaming the whole experience, but I really just knew that I wasn't. I told Robert about it, and he seemed really surprised. We told his mom about it too, and after a conversation with me and Robert, we decided to look around the house. I don't know if he fully believed me. We went around the house and started seeing if any windows or doors were open. We eventually got to the basement and the spare bedroom that they had. When we looked inside, we saw it was a complete mess. Robert was shocked and said they hadn't left it like this, and it had been cleaned the last time he saw it. He also said that they didn't really go in that bedroom much and the door was usually shut. We suddenly both got the creeps and ran back upstairs and told his mom. She went down and then returned back upstairs a short time later, saying she was calling the police. A while later, the police showed up and searched the house. They didn't find the man, but a window in the guest bedroom to the basement was left open. I don't know if the man was already gone or if he left when he heard us talking about it, but it appeared he had been living in the guest room for several days. A few weeks ago, I helped my friend John move one weekend from an apartment to a small house on the other side of town. It was a pretty tough job and it was just the two of us, so it took us a while. By the time we were almost done, it was pretty late at night and we were both exhausted. John had a spare bed that we had moved into the basement. He told me I could sleep there for the night and then we could finish up in the morning. I took him up on his offer because I really didn't want to drive the 10 minutes back to my place as tired as I was. Plus, we still had a few things left to move. It was a pretty comfortable bed he had down there, and it felt great to lay down and close my eyes. I was starting to drift off when I noticed some noises. It sounded like something moving around down there, but I couldn't tell where the sounds were coming from exactly. I looked all around the basement and didn't see anything at all. It
It was sort of creepy, but I tried my best to just ignore it. The noises continued though, and I thought maybe it was mice or something, which was pretty gross, but as tired as I was, I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, after I woke up and went upstairs, John asked me how I slept down in the basement. I told him it was good, but I mentioned the noises I had heard. He then told me that he too had heard noises as well coming from what sounded like the basement, but figured it had to be me making the noises. He said he also heard noises in another area of the house as well. I think we both got a little creeped out by this, but we figured it had to be a mouse, and went on with the job of moving the rest of his stuff. I was moving a few of the last boxes to the basement, and I guess I was carrying too many and dropped one of the boxes on the floor. When I went to pick it up, I noticed something. In the corner of the basement, sort of under the stairs, there was a little handle sticking out of the floor. It was hard to see, and something that you wouldn't pick up unless you looked really close because of how hidden it was. I told John to come over and take a look. He looked closely and then pulled on the handle, and it lifted up a sort of trap door leading to a hidden room in the house. The room was very small, but there was a sleeping bag in it, as well as a few water bottles that were empty. It appeared someone had been living in there, but nobody was there at the moment. Me and John put two and two together from the noises we had heard, and were pretty creeped out. We searched the house, but found no one. After that, we reported the room and how someone had been living in it. Whoever had been living there never did return. They must have left for good after realizing we were there. Years ago, when I was 12 years old, there was a kid at my school named David who invited me over one day for a sleepover. It was kind of random and I was sort of surprised by it, because I didn't really know David all that well. We had talked a few times here and there, and he had been new to the school the year before, but we never really hung out at all. I told him I didn't know, but he persuaded me, so I said all right, and I asked my mom when I got home from school. She said yes and drove me to his house after school that Friday. It was my first time being at David's house, and I was still kind of surprised that he invited me over, but I thought it was cool to be making a new friend. He showed me around his house, which was very nice, and we played some video games. David overall just seemed a little bit strange to me. I didn't really know what exactly it was, but I felt like I just didn't really get along with him. We had sort of different interests and things like that, and he just didn't really seem like the kind of guy I would hang out with. Finally, it was time for bed, and I got in my sleeping bag on the floor of David's room, which was a pretty decent-sized bedroom for a kid. It took me a while to fall asleep, but eventually I did, only to be woken up a few hours later. I woke up super sweaty and realized that my sleeping bag was completely zipped up and another blanket was covering my head. I took them off and immediately felt the nice feeling of cooler air. I looked around knowing I for sure didn't put that extra blanket on myself. I thought maybe David did, but why would David do something like that? I looked over and saw David was awake. I asked him why he put a blanket on my head, but he denied it. I knew he was lying, but when I accused him again, he got pretty angry at me. I decided to just try to go back to bed and make it through the rest of the night, and I could go back home in the morning. I was finally able to get back to sleep, and when I woke up, it was morning. When I did, I looked around, but David wasn't in the bedroom. I figured he must have gone to the bathroom or something, so I waited there for a few minutes. Eventually, I really had to pee, so I got up to leave the room, but the door wouldn't open. It seemed to be locked from the outside. This was the last straw for me. I was pretty annoyed with how David was acting towards me, and I called my mom on my phone and asked her to come pick me up. I didn't have a good time at all, but I was still glad, I guess, that I gave it a chance to make another friend. David, by this point, just seemed really strange to me. My mom told me she would come and get me, so I knocked on David's door and called out to him that it was locked, but nobody came. I knocked several more times and even shouted once. I told him I was locked in his room, but I got no response once again. David's house was pretty big, so there's a chance I wasn't heard, but the whole thing just made me really angry. Finally, David's mom opened the door to his bedroom and told me that my mom was here to pick me up.
The way she said it, she sounded almost annoyed. And that was another thing that was sort of strange to me, is that David's parents were kind of unfriendly. I was just happy to go home, though, and I left without even seeing David at all. It was a Saturday, so I spent the rest of the day just hanging around the house and playing some video games. That night, however, I was in my bedroom when my mom called out to me that one of my friends was there. I walked out and saw David standing at the front door. He did not look happy. I walked over to him and he angrily asked me why I left his house so early without even saying bye to him or anything. I told him he locked me in his bedroom and I didn't even know where he was. He then denied it and responded by calling me a horrible friend and storming off. I really didn't care though. I just went back inside and started playing video games again. But about 15 minutes later, I suddenly heard the sound of glass breaking coming from my window. It scared me badly and I just about had a heart attack. I looked over to my window and saw glass everywhere. Then I saw a rock tumble to the ground. My parents came running into my room and saw the glass. I was all right and I wasn't near the window. My parents ran over and looked out the window to see David running away down the street. David had thrown the rock through my bedroom window, breaking it. My parents called his parents, and I remember hearing them argue for a little bit before finally hanging up. I don't really know what happened to David after that, but I never saw him at school again. The story I'm about to tell you happened when I was a kid. I would guess about 10 years old. I'm 26 now, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I was in elementary school at the time, and there was this new kid named Robert that was in my grade. The first day of school, we sat next to each other in class, so I kind of became Robert's first friend since he moved into town. In the months that followed, Robert made some more friends that weren't really in my friend group. Plus, we didn't have any classes together the next semester, so we kind of went our separate ways and didn't talk as much. However, we would still say hi in the hallways once in a while and be friendly with one another. I remember when it came towards the end of the school year, Robert told me his birthday was coming up, and he was wondering if I wanted to hang out. I said sure, and he gave me his mother's phone number and told my mom to call his. I went to the store and got him a video game that I knew he would like, and on Friday after school, I went to his house. When I got to his house, I saw that there was 2 other kids there who I didn't really know from my school. We started out having pizza and then played a few games. As the party went on, I ended up getting along with Robert's friends very nicely, and it was a fun time. At about midnight, we all went to bed in Robert's living room floor. I got the spot on the very far end, which was right next to the dining room. I fell asleep rather quickly, but awoke sometime later in the middle of the night. I heard some voices quietly talking, but they weren't kids' voices. They sounded like adults. I noticed that it was pitch black as I looked around. As my eyes started to adjust, I could hear the talking was coming from the dining room that I was near. I was angled at a point where I couldn't quite see much of the dining room due to a wall with the TV on it, but I could make out part of the table. I listened closer and could hear a man's voice, as well as another man and a woman. From where I was, I could only see their feet, but I couldn't make out anything they were saying. I figured it had to be Robert's parents, but I didn't know who the third person was, because Robert told me he didn't have any siblings. Plus, this man seemed to be a full-grown adult. Just then, I heard one of them raise their voice. I squinted and looked at my watch and saw that it was slightly past 4 in the morning. It seemed a little bit odd for his parents to be up at this time. I looked at the rest of the boys sleeping to see if any of them were awake, but they all seemed to be fast asleep. I wasn't tired anymore, however, and I guess my curiosity got the better of me because I leaned over slowly and looked around the corner into the dining room. I saw a man in a black jacket and another man and a woman who I assumed were Robert's parents, though I couldn't make out anybody very well in the dark. They were talking, but I couldn't really tell what they were talking about. Then, they all seemed to notice me, and they all stopped talking at once. I quickly ducked back into my sleeping bag and closed my eyes again to go back to sleep. I was sort of embarrassed that they had seen me spying on them. Eventually,
I just drifted off back to sleep and woke up the next morning with the other boys at around 9 a.m. We all got up and had some cereal for breakfast and played some video games. As we did, I asked Robert why his parents were talking to a man in the middle of the night at their dining room table, because the whole thing just seemed really odd to me. Robert said he didn't know anyone who would be at his house at 4 a.m. and said he didn't know why his parents would be up at that hour. Robert's mother came in and asked us how we slept, and when we did, Robert asked her my question. His mom looked at me and laughed. She said no man was here and his parents had both slept the whole night in their room. She told me I must have been dreaming. I laughed and agreed with them because I didn't want to argue. However, I know myself, and I know that I was not dreaming. I was wide awake, and I know what I saw and heard. After that, I didn't go to Robert's house again, and at the end of the school year, he moved away again. We weren't able to stay in touch, so I may never know the answers to that night. About 5 years ago, I had a sleepover with my best friend. For this story, we'll call him Jay. Jay and I had been friends for a long time, and we would often hang out at each other's houses and spend the night. On this particular occasion, it was a Friday night, and he came to my place to play some Madden. We had planned before that he would stay over, so we were hoping to stay up really late playing against one another. At this time, we were both in high school, but my older sister and my older brother were both away at college, so I had the entire basement pretty much to myself. We played on my PlayStation 4, on a pretty big TV that we had down there. We played on my PlayStation 4, on a pretty big TV that we had down there. At about 10 p.m., as we were in the middle of a game, we heard the sound of a knock coming from the window. We both looked over in the direction, but couldn't see anything out of the window due to it being light inside and dark outside. We had a sliding glass door down there, but it had blinds covering that up. We both paused the game and were quiet for a few minutes. We heard what sounded like the bush outside my door moving, and both of us leaped up from that sound. I ran upstairs and told my parents what had happened. My dad came downstairs and looked out the window. Then, he walked outside and looked around. He came back in and said he didn't see anything. Neither of my parents seemed too concerned about it and said it was probably just an animal. I didn't think it seemed like a noise that an animal would make, however, but we just made sure to lock the door and kept playing Madden. Around an hour later, my parents came down to say goodnight and that they were going to bed. Only around 20 minutes after that, we heard the knocking once again. This time, we could hear it was coming from the window next to the door. It lasted longer this time than the first, but we still couldn't see anything as we looked out the window from across the room. It was pretty creepy, but my parents had just gone to bed, and I didn't want to wake them, so we tried to ignore it. We couldn't help but feel a little scared, though. We paused the game again and started talking about what we should do. We debated going outside or looking out the window. We decided to look out the window, but when we did, we saw nothing. After staying alert near the door for a while, we finally calmed back down and went back to playing video games until about 2 o'clock in the morning. During that time, we had no more interruptions. We both got pretty tired by then and decided to go to bed. I slept on one of the couches down there, and Jay slept on the other. We fell asleep for probably an hour, but awoke at around 3 in the morning to more noises once again. This time, they seemed louder. It was more knocking as well as the bushes being moved. But now, we heard the doorknob being jiggled, as if someone was trying to open it. Without hesitating, me and Jay both got up and ran upstairs as quick as we could. As we did, we got about halfway up the stairs, and we heard the sound of glass breaking coming from the basement. I was terrified and ran for my parents' room. Once we got inside, we called the police. My dad left the room to lock the door to the basement and make sure that the man couldn't get upstairs. We heard noises downstairs for a while, and then they stopped. The police arrived several minutes later. They looked around and searched the entire house, but the man was gone. They did see that several valuable items from the basement had been stolen, including my PlayStation 4. We were just happy to be safe, though. The police ended up being able to track down the man several days later, and I got a new PlayStation 4. It made for quite a story, though. This story took place when I was in college. I was a junior at the time, and I was in a history class where we got assigned a group project in groups of 4. The people in my group I didn't know very well at all. It was me, Matt, Anna, and Leonard. Matt and Anna seemed cool. So did Leonard for the most part, but he just gave me an odd feeling for some reason. We had to take a field trip to complete one of our big group projects that was worth a lot of points. We decided to all carpool together and collect the data we needed at a historical area around an hour away. Leonard volunteered to drive us, so we all met at his house and he drove us there. Once we were done, he drove us all back to his house. When we got back, we had some work to do with answering questions, and it took us quite a long time, a lot longer than we had expected. It got to be pretty late at night, and we all got very tired, but we weren't finished, so Leonard suggested we all spend the night at his place. I didn't really want to, but we were all really tired, and he had a lot of space because he told us his roommates were away, so we agreed to stay over. Leonard went to his room, and they had enough couches for all of us to each sleep on one in the living room. It was actually pretty comfortable. Either that, or I was just so tired that I fell right asleep. However, I woke up sometime later. When I did, I looked up and about had a heart attack. I saw Leonard literally standing on the end of the couch that I was sleeping on, staring right at me and smiling. It was a very creepy smile. The room was very dark, but this I could see clearly. I looked up and saw the other 2 people in our group asleep on their couches. I whispered to Leonard, asking him what he was doing, but he didn't answer me. He just kept smiling and staring at me. I then sat up and backed away to the far end of the couch away from him. He remained standing on the arm of the couch at the other far end, and then dramatically jumped off to the ground and sprinted out of the room. I sat there for several minutes trying to understand what had just happened. Then I saw Leonard's head poke out from behind the doorway and look at me. This time I called out to him. "Leonard," I said. At this point I saw Anna wake up. She watched Leonard as well. He just looked at us both and smiled. Then he made the hand motion with his hands as if he was taking a picture of us with a camera. He then ran out of the room once again. Anna looked at me and whispered, "What was that?" I shrugged, and we both sat there for about 30 minutes. Leonard didn't come back to the room after that. Eventually, I was able to fall back asleep and woke up the next morning at 8. Leonard was back to normal, and we finished the project. Once we were all done and about to leave, I asked him what he was doing the previous night. He acted like he didn't know what we were talking about, and Anna backed me up on the story. Matt seemed really interested as we told the story, even though he had slept through the whole thing. When we described to Leonard what happened, he told us we had to be joking with him. We asked him if he sleepwalked, and he said no, he never did that. We were very puzzled when we heard that. Then he shook his head and said, "Never mind, I guess I was sleepwalking." He said he had no memory of it at all whatsoever. We all laughed at that we finally had a logical explanation for what had happened, although I was still a little creeped out. As we were all walking out the door to leave, Leonard called my name as I was about to step outside. I looked back at him, and he once again made the hand motion that he was taking a picture of me. The same motion he had made the night before. As he did, he winked at me. This really gave me the creeps, and it leads me to believe Leonard was not sleepwalking at all, but awake the previous night. But I never saw Leonard again after that, and I really have no explanation for what happened. The story I'm about to tell you occurred when I was a boy, about 8 years old. I was at my best friend Jack's house, and it was my first time having a sleepover. We hung out and played some football during the day, and then we played video games at night until it was time for bed. Jack slept in his bed, and I slept in my sleeping bag that was at the other end of the room. All of the lights got turned off at about 11, and I tried to go to sleep. Jack seemed to fall asleep pretty fast because I could hear him snoring, but I just laid there awake. I was only used to sleeping in my own bed, and being away from home for the first time, I just couldn't get comfortable in the same way. I laid there and closed my eyes for what felt like a really long time. The room was pitch black aside from a little green light coming from Jack's Xbox. My eyes adjusted to the dark, but I could still only see the basic shapes of things around the room. After closing my eyes for a while longer, I was still unable to sleep, so I opened them and started to look around the room once again. It was still very dark, but when I looked in front of the doorway, which was open, I saw what looked like the outline of a man standing in the room. I told myself that I was just imagining things. I could barely see it, and I kind of had to squint in order to do so. The man appeared to be just standing there in the front of the room. I was starting to feel scared, so I buried my head into my pillow and shut my eyes. I refused to open them until I fell asleep, because I was sure it was my imagination of the man being in the room, and I just wanted to get some rest. Eventually, I did fall asleep, I would guess about 20 minutes later. When I woke up the next morning, I had forgotten all about it, and I saw that Jack had just woken up as well. We got up, and then he said to me that he had a crazy dream last night. I asked him what it was. Then he told me he had a dream that a man came into his room at night. When he said this, I immediately remembered and got the creeps. I told him that I thought I saw a man in the room when I was trying to fall asleep. We both looked at each other in disbelief. We quickly ran downstairs where his parents were to feel safer, but when we did, we noticed the window in the hallway was wide open. Jack asked his mother if she had opened the window, and she said no. I went back home shortly after that. I'm not sure if Jack ever told his parents about a man being in his bedroom or not. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I had a pretty large friend group. I was an easygoing kid who could be friends with just about anyone. Because of this, I got invited to many birthday parties. The one that stands out the most, though, is a sleepover birthday party that my friend Ben had for his 7th birthday. There was probably 8 to 10 of us total. It was a pretty big party. I didn't really know Ben all that well, but I was still excited to be at his birthday party. I even remember that I got him one of those little basketball hoops that you put on your door with the little soft basketballs. Anyways, we all had pizza, cake, and then Ben opened his presents. After that, we played some games out in his yard. One of those games that we played was hide and go seek. I really liked this game because I was usually really good at it. When it was time to hide, all the kids scattered around the yard. Ben's yard was kind of big. He had a chain link fence going around it, but his house was on the corner, so there was 2 areas near the road. I ran to the back corner to hide behind a tree that was next to the fence. I stood there and tried to listen carefully to see if anybody was coming. After about 5 minutes of standing there, I heard a man's voice behind me. It startled me, and I turned around and saw a man that appeared to be around 60 years old, standing on the other side of the fence, smiling at me. He said hi and asked me what I was doing. I assumed he was a neighbor, and I told him we were playing hide and go seek. Then he asked me if I lived there. I told him no, I was just sleeping over for Ben's birthday party. Then the man walked away. I ended up winning hide and go seek, which I was pretty excited about. After that, it got dark and we all went inside. We watched a movie and then we were told to go to bed by Ben's parents. Because there were so many of us, half of us kids slept in Ben's room and the other half had to sleep in the living room. I slept in the living room with 4 other kids. I got a good spot, which was next to the window, because I didn't want to be in the middle of the floor. When the lights went out, I fell asleep pretty quickly, but I woke up in the night to hear a familiar voice whispering at me. I was very confused at first, then I looked around. I saw the man from earlier standing at the window above me, looking directly at me. He was smiling and then put his finger over his lips to be quiet. Then he whispered hello to me and motioned for me to come closer to him. He said he didn't get to finish talking to me because of our game, so he came back. Then he asked me if I wanted to come with him. I wish I would have ran away, but I just kind of stood there not knowing what to do. Then he put his arm on my shoulder and started to guide me out the window. I didn't like this at all, and I asked the man what he was doing. He told me to be quiet, but I really didn't like this, so I told him no. Another boy who was sleeping woke up and asked what we were doing. The man then tried grabbing me and taking me with him, but I resisted, and he bumped into the side of the window, making a loud noise. That was enough to wake up the rest of the boys in the living room, and then the man let go of me and ran away. Some of the boys asked what was going on, and I explained. After that, they said they should tell Ben's parents. Eventually, we did, and I didn't realize just how serious it was. The next day, the police came, and everybody had to go home early. It turns out the man didn't even live in the neighborhood, and nobody knew who he was. When I was about 12 years old, me and my friend would occasionally sleep over at each other's houses. One time when I was staying over at his place for a night, we went to bed at about 2 in the morning. My friend's parents and sister were long asleep by this time. We had stayed up pretty late playing Call of Duty and were finally sleepy. My friend had a bunk bed, even though he had the whole bedroom to himself, so I took the bottom bunk and he took the top. After we shut off the Xbox, we fell asleep pretty fast. I remember that I woke up though at 4 in the morning. When I woke up, I was wide awake. I didn't know why I'd woken up, because I usually slept all the way through the night. I realized that I really had to pee, so I went down the hall to use my friend's bathroom. But as soon as I opened his bedroom door and walked out of the room, I saw something strange. His attic door was open and the ladder was hanging halfway down. As far as I knew, his family never really used the attic, and I hadn't heard anyone in the hall before we went to bed. I figured it was someone in his family, but it just seemed odd to me. I went into the bathroom and used it. When I was done, I walked back out into the hallway, but the attic door was now completely shut. This really gave me the creeps. I hadn't heard any noises, and I knew I wasn't imagining things. I debated waking up my friend, but I decided not to, and I went back to sleep. The next morning, I told my friend all about what I had seen. When I did, his eyes got big, and his face got real serious. He said that he had been hearing noises up there at night, but he figured it was nothing but maybe squirrels, and he said when he told his parents, they assured him that it was nothing. We decided to tell his father when we went downstairs, because luckily it was a Saturday and he didn't have to go to work. When we did, he made a joke about us being afraid of animals, but when we told him about the door being open, he got a little more serious. He went up to go take a look. He poked his head up for about 10 seconds and then came back down. When he came back down, he said that there was a man up there and that we should call the police. That is exactly what we did, and about 15 minutes later, they showed up and arrested the man. He looked really dirty, and they found that he had been most likely living in the attic for around a week. This happened just last month. My childhood best friend moved about 3 hours away recently. We go to different high schools now, but during the summer I went up to visit him at his new place for a weekend. I stayed over for 2 nights, and we mostly played around in his yard, which was pretty big, and played video games inside. He has a really nice walkout basement with a huge TV in it, and it's pretty much all to himself.
On the second night, we were playing each other in Madden, and it went late into the night. His parents were away, and so we lost track of time and found ourselves still playing at nearly 3 in the morning. We weren't even tired and were in the middle of another game when out of nowhere we heard a knocking on his sliding door. It was pitch black outside and we had a couple lights on, so we really couldn't see. His nearest neighbor, though, lived pretty far away and we weren't being loud or anything, so we didn't know why anybody would knock at this hour. My friend had been texting with his parents a couple hours earlier, so we knew it wasn't them. Then we heard the knocking again. My friend paused his game and looked. From the angle that we were at, we were unsure if whoever it was could see us or not, because the couch was kind of facing away from the door. We decided not to answer it and hoped whoever it was would go away. The knocking stopped, but then they tried opening the door, which thankfully was locked. We saw the person walk away after that, but not even 10 seconds later, they came back. This time they hit the door with their hand. We could see that it was a taller man wearing a hood and his head was down, but couldn't make out much more than that. After that, my friend and I ran upstairs. We shut the door to the upstairs, but it didn't lock, so we ran into a bathroom and locked the door. Then we called the police. A couple of minutes later, we heard the sound of glass breaking in the basement. The police said they were sending somebody out, but we knew it wouldn't be about 10 minutes before they arrived because of where my friend lived. We waited silently in the bathroom to hear if the man was going to come upstairs or not. Eventually, the upstairs door opened. We heard the man walking to the living room. Then he approached the bathroom we were hiding in. We held our mouths to cover our breathing. It felt like he stopped in front of the door for a whole minute. Then he slowly turned the knob until it stopped from being locked, and then he walked away. About 10 seconds later, we heard the sirens. We waited until the police were pounding on the door. They were able to make it inside and arrest the man. My friend and I felt very lucky to be safe that night.